Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Camille sat in her rocking chair. She was looking at old pictures and remembering the old days. There were pictures from when she was born. Looking at them, vivid pictures of memories and spinning in her head. Looking at the pictures from her childhood, she smiled, remembering her parents and their small house on the outskirts of town. Of the childhood pictures, one in particular stood out. It was of little Camille and a little boy named Stephen. The boy, dressed in tattered pants, had abrasions on his arm and face, but his kind smile burned on his face. Then as a child, no one thought that a friendship with a little bully would grow into a lifetime. Even Camille herself could not think how much pain and love this boy would bring at the same time. Stephen had looked up to her since childhood. Every day was spent in her company. She was the one who helped him with his homework. She would bandage his shattered knees and treat his wounds. Stephen's life didn't turn out much better from the script. He grew up in a family without a father. His mother said that he was away on a business trip and would return soon, but soon never came. The boy grew up and the need for a father grew. Grandmother and mother could not give what his father had to teach. The family lived in poverty, barely making ends meet. Mother and grandmother worked hard. Stephen stayed home alone, took many walks and fought. His mother cried a lot, but hid her tears so that her only son would not see anything. She tried to give him everything she could. She taught him good manners, taught him to count and write, dreamed that he could escape from the bad life and make his life what he wanted it to be. One day Mom noticed a change in her son's life. He started smiling more often, laughing, almost stopped fighting. Every night Mom would check Stephen's lessons and through tiredness try to explain what he didn't understand. After she noticed that her son began to change, she saw the lessons done. On the weekend that fell, she decided to talk to her son. Saturday came. Emily, Stephen's mother, made his favorite pancakes. The boy was still asleep. Upon waking up, the boy smelled the aroma of his favorite pancakes. Getting up, he put on his slippers and ran to the kitchen. Mom was standing at the stove. Hugging his mom, he sat down at the table. On the table was a plate with a small mound of pancakes on it. Emily, having finished baking, poured tea for her son and decided to have a serious conversation. "I decided to bake your favorite pancakes. But how's school going? I see your grades are better. You've stopped fighting in the street. Son, tell me what happened. Maybe you met someone." "Mom, these pancakes are delicious. It's been so long since I'd eaten them. Everything's fine at school. I got a B in math and a B in geography with Christopher. We were studying where the people of Africa live. On Friday in PE, we played soccer with the boys. I scored 2 goals. The boy ate pancakes and happily told his mom about his successes at school. He never lied to Mom and always shared his thoughts with her. "Yes, Mom, I met a girl. She transferred to us from another school. She's nice. She helps me with my homework and helps me with my wounds. Her name is Camille. A little girl with blue eyes and pigtails. She's very nice and funny, really." The boy laughed joyfully. His mother looked at him with a loving gaze as he waited for the last pancakes on his plate. "Son, and you introduced us. Bring her next weekend. We'll talk. I'll bake a cake. And most importantly, remember, never hurt her well." "Yes, Mom. I'll invite her next week." The wind rumbled behind the window. Small pebbles and branches rattled against the window. Camille realized she was dozing in her chair. She was dreaming of the clear silhouette of that boy from her memories when they were children. Evening was gradually descending on the city. There were fewer and fewer people on the streets. The streetlights were coming on. The room gradually filled with darkness. Camille was also sitting in her cozy armchair, covered with a plaid. She tried to remember what she had talked about with Stephen's mother. Why was Stephen embarrassed and blushing all night? At another question from his mom, the smile never left her face. She remembered being in their apartment so often afterward, remembered Stephen's grandmother baking pies and telling stories of her youth, and how Emily used to make jokes about the children. And the boy was immediately embarrassed. Scrolled through another scene from the past. Camille found the strength to get up from her chair, walked over and flicked the light switch on. The room was filled with a nice warm light. She often sat in this room and reminisced about her life. She enjoyed reliving pleasant moments again, but only in her memories. Sometimes she wanted to put the pictures away, but she couldn't. She didn't want to once again lose the people who used to be important to her. Wiping the dust off the picture, she headed for the kitchen. The kettle's on button clicked and sat down at the table. The kettle was making the noise. As Camille reached for a mug, it boiled and turned off, plunging the room into silence. The next day, Camille decided to do a house cleaning of the sleeve sunsets. Taking a rag, she lost the pictures and all the furniture in the room. By chance, as she read another picture hung on the wall, that one came off with a resounding crack of glass. The picture frame shattered. Camille began to pick up large shards of parts of the collapsed frame. After picking up the broken parts of the frame, she picked up the photograph. There were 2 teenagers in it. Camille and Stephen were about 15 years old in the picture. Camille remembered that time very well. How had Stephen started working from the fact that his grandmother had gotten sick and he had decided to take over the responsibilities collapsing on his mom? Camille remembered very well how often they fought about nothing, but the desire to lose each other always came to the forefront. Stephen always apologized first when he asked for forgiveness. His cheeks poured a lardy color. Camille loved it. She hugged him, knowing that everything would work out and they would overcome everything together. Stephen spent a lot of time at work, taking on any job, sweeping yards, working as a loader, cleaning old people's houses. The money he received was small, but it was a great help to Mom. Camille rarely saw the boy. They began to see each other less often. The long separation made her heart ache. She was afraid that their last meeting might be fatal. After a while, she started showing up at her job just to see him. She'd bring his favorite cheese and sausage sandwiches. All her life, she would make him those sandwiches. But back then, as a child, Camille could never have imagined such a thing. Stephen worked hard and his progress in school was negative. Camille spent all her free time trying to get Stephen up to speed on his subjects. Rarely was money given out when they would go for a walk, coming to their spot in the park, talking about everything. Stephen would tell funny stories and Camille would laugh. They were good together. At one point, she realized that their friendship was turning into something special. She started to notice things she hadn't seen before. She liked everything about him. The way he talked, the way he acted, his thick, dark hair, his big brown eyes, the mole on his right cheek. She was hurt and scared when Stephen got into conflicts with his peers. But the biggest fear became telling her how she felt. Every day at home, she replayed the conversations in her head, but the feeling of fear never left her. The fear of losing the person she loved was taking over the situation. Stephen was experiencing the same feeling of fear of losing his beloved or hearing a negative answer to the proposal to be together were spinning in his head. But it could not go on like this for long. Pulling himself together, overcoming his fear, Stephen decided to talk about his feelings. He made an appointment. Even now, Camille remembers that day. It was the 28th of May. Stephen called her after school and told her to come to the park in the evening to their place. When he spoke, his face was serious. It scared Camille a little. She wondered if today was the day he would decide to leave. What does he want to tell me? Why didn't he decide to talk now? All day long, she lay on the sofa thinking about what she wanted to say to her beloved. At these thoughts, she began to fall asleep. Her head was miserable. She decided to lie down. Waking up, looking at the clock, she started to get ready for the meeting. Leaving the house, she took a quick step towards the park. Her heart was beating fast. Her breath cleared. She was scared, but she kept walking forward. Stephen was already standing at the appointed place. He was intensely nervous. Determined phrases were rolling around in his head. He knew what he was getting into and what he was about to go through. When he saw Camille, he smiled. Noticing this, Camille chuckled. He stepped closer, pulled himself together, and said in a firm voice, "Hi, it's good to see you. You know, you and I go way back. You helped me a lot back then, and now I see how much you care when I fight. I'm afraid to admit one thing I'm afraid to admit to you. For weeks now, I've been walking around thinking about how to talk to you about it. Seeing you makes my thoughts gather in a clod, and I can't explain it properly." Camille's cheeks lit up in a red flame. Did her secret feelings prove to be mutual? Stephen did not finish, but she knew how this conversation would end. He was blushing too. His ears burned like the bright sun. It amused her to watch his ears blazing with fire. He fell silent for a moment. There was an awkward silence. Camille wanted to say something, but just as she opened her mouth to utter the first words, Stephen spoke. "We've known each other since we were children. I remember the day we met. I remember that little girl in the red dress. Your pigtails and your bright blue, burning eyes. Your eyes still burning to this day. Looking into them makes me blurry. Camille, I like you." Before he could say anything, he felt small warm hands on him. Camille had her arms around his neck and was quietly flapping her nose. He hugged her hard. There was no limit to his joy. He had received reciprocation for his words, even though she had not said a word. Warm tears flowed down Camille's face. She was glad that the feeling was mutual. She continued to hang on his neck. Her legs felt like absorbent cotton. They stood like that for about 10 minutes, embracing. Camille looked into his eyes. The guy was smiling. "Stephen, I'd like you for a long time too, but I've been afraid to tell you. Afraid of losing you. I've never felt this way before." "Finish." She hugged him again, taking his hands. The lovers went for a walk in the park. They talked, laughed, joked. Camille could not and did not want to let go of his hand. They spent the whole evening together. Dusk gradually descended over the city. There was hunger in the streets. Stephen offered to walk Camille home. The thought of parting even briefly upset both of them. They agreed to meet tomorrow when Stephen came home from work. The closer they got to the house, the slower their steps became. As they approached the driveway, Stephen gave his lover another hug and Camille kissed him on the cheek with a smile and a great mood. Stephen headed home. Once inside the apartment, Camille ran into the room and hugged the big teddy bear that Stephen had once given her, and us little bear, and imagined her favorite boy. Remembering this story, Camille put the picture on the table. The smile never left her face. The memory spun like a movie. She glanced at the closet. There, a large teddy bear sat in its place. His fur was squished in places, his eye had fallen off, and had been lost in the move. But the gift that was important to her was still there after all these years. There was a whole box of his gifts in her closet. Camille saved and cherished each one. The children grew up fast. Their feelings grew stronger. Camille knew she wanted to spend the rest of her life with this man. Stephen worked, helped his family, but never forgot his beloved for a moment. Every day after work, he would pack up and come to Camille's yard. They walked, swung on the swings, and talked a lot. Time flew by unnoticeably past days, weeks, months, years. After graduating from high school, Camille wanted to apply to a neighboring city to study design at a university. Stephen was about to go into the army. Camille promised to wait for him, but being separated for a whole year worried her. There was a whole summer ahead of them, but the couple feared there would be little time. Camille offered to go into town with her for a few days to apply for college. Stephen worked for several days without a day off to raise the necessary amount of money for the trip. When he came home, he was exhausted. In the morning, he got up and went to work again. The long-awaited day had arrived. Emily gave Stephen some of the money she had saved. The son did not take the money for a long time, but his mother persuaded him. Meeting Camille at the entrance, the boy took the bags and headed towards the train station. After going through the ticket check, they entered their carriage. "Camille, cheerfully paced ahead, stepping into her compartment. Stephen put away his things and sat down in his seat. His beloved's eyes burned with new adventures. The train moved on. With each passing second, they got farther away from their hometown. Bed to bed, Camille took a book in her hands and plunged into a fascinating reading of her favorite novel. Stephen went out into the corridor and looked at the glimmering forests of the fields. He loved the scenery they passed by on the train. He loved his girlfriend, but realized he was leaving her alone for a whole year. Walking into the compartment, Stephen noticed that Camille had fallen asleep with a book in her hands. Inserting a bookmark into the book, he put it away on the shelf. Taking a blanket, he covered his girlfriend from the seat next to him. The clatter of the wheels put the mind to sleep, and Stephen did not notice how he began to fall asleep. They slept through the evening. Through sleep, Stephen smelled the odor of fresh emergency tea. Opening his eyes, he saw his girlfriend entering the compartment with 2 glasses of tea. Later, he woke up. "I thought you'd be asleep all the way. I made you some black tea. How do you like it?" "I woke up and really wanted a mug of hot tea. The hardest part was getting out from under you. Why did you sleep sitting up? Why didn't you go to your bed?" "I didn't want to sleep, but when I tucked you in and sat next to you, fatigue got the better of me. And I didn't notice how I fell asleep. Did you mind my company?" "No, it's fine. I'm glad you were there for me even so. But you're tired." She came quite close, put the glasses on the table, and kissed him on the forehead. The tea was delicious, the way he likes it, strong, overboiled, black with sugar. They drank the tea and looked out over the passing little villages of the plain, the dense forests. It was beginning to grow dark outside. Every minute it became harder to see something in the window. She climbed under the covers and pressed herself against Stephen. The guy looked at his watch and said, "In 2 o'clock we'll be there. Soon we will start a new life. But how are you ready to study at the university, to go to classes? Spending sleepless nights studying. Living in a dorm with 1 tomb. I'm scared. Since we were little kids, we've been close. And now I'll be alone. But I think we'll make it. I'm not afraid to study. Think about who helped you with your homework. When you come back from the army, I hope you'll go to college too. We'll rent a small apartment and live together. Just 1 year, and we'll be together." Having finished the phrase, she pressed herself against Stephen. He, in turn, hugged her and kissed her on the top of her head. An hour later, the conductor came in and announced that their station would be in 45 minutes. Stephen began to gather the unfolded items into a bag and check that nothing had been forgotten. It was pitch dark outside. The time was nearing midnight. At the beginning of the first of the night, the train screeched to a screeching halt. The couple began to move toward the exit. Saying goodbye to the conductor, they moved towards the train station. Walking through the station, Stephen caught a cab, and they drove to a pre-booked hotel. The city was ablaze with bright lights, crowds of people strolling through the night streets. Noisy music came from the clubs. The city was alive with nightlife. The feeling of sleep was gone. I wanted to walk the streets of the town, to feel the cool night breeze. The cab pulled up to the hotel at a leisurely pace. The driver helped to take the bags out of the trunk, said goodbye, and drove away. Stephen took the bags and headed for the hotel desk. Camille held the door for him to get through the door. At the front desk, they grabbed their room key and headed there. Once inside the elevator, the girl pressed the button and the doors closed. As the elevator started moving, there was an uncomfortable feeling in her lower abdomen, but it passed quickly. On the door of the room in huge numbers was written 1478. Opening the door, they entered the room. The view from the hotel window was breathtaking. From the 14th floor, you could see the whole city. Having unpacked some of the necessary things, Camille headed for the shower, while Stephen continued to admire the view from the window. An hour of waiting and listening to the singing in the shower passed as Camille stepped out. Stephen stared at her without taking his eyes off her. She was extraordinarily beautiful. Walking up to her, he put his arms around her, and they merged in a passionate kiss. After hugging her, he picked up his things and headed for the shower. Stephen didn't like being in the shower for long. He didn't want to drink either. 10 minutes after leaving, he returned. Camille was sitting on the bed listening to her hair. Droplets from her hair were oozing down her shoulder. Walking over to the nightstand, Stephen took out his watch and looked at the time, 2 o'clock. Stephen decided to inquire about the plans for the day so that he could plan everything properly. Tell me, what are the plans for tomorrow? Tomorrow, or rather today, we have to get up early, take the documents to 3 universities, and then we are free. We can walk around the city, we can go to a museum or a movie. It depends on how it works out. We have 3 whole days before we go home. I want to go everywhere. There's an amusement park nearby. We'll go for a ride. And in the evening, we can go to the fountain. They say it's beautiful at night. Or did you have something in mind? No. I like your options. Tomorrow, we'll go to the university first, and then we'll decide where we'll go. Then let's go to bed. We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow. Camille smiled and finished drying her hair, putting away the hairdryer comb. She turned off the light and lay down next to Stephen. She wanted to get warm. As she came with cold skin to Stephen, goosebumps ran down his back. He put his arms around her and she started kissing and biting his neck, then on his cheek. Taking the initiative, Stephen kissed her passionately on the lips. She reciprocated. They savored each other. Passion grew at breakneck speed. They kept each other awake until 0 o'clock. Morning came. The warm rays of the sun woke up, passing through the window. Waking up, Stephen admired the sleeping girl. All the beauty was ruined by the ringing of the alarm clock. The girl woke up and reluctantly rolled over to the other side. Stephen gently bit her neck and she laughed. Beloved, it's time to get up. A new day awaits us. Lots of plans for today. Come on, get up. Or I'll bite you until you get up. Let the day wait for someone else. Biting is illegal. She laughed and threw back the blanket, getting out of bed. She walked over to the window. Her beautiful body in the sunlight broke into Stephen's head. He followed her, hugging her from behind, kissed her neck, and headed to wash up. Camille headed after him. In the shower, they splashed from the towel fight. After getting out of the shower, Stephen began to get dressed and looked for a suitable place for breakfast. The clock showed 7:42. Gathering, the couple left the room. They closed the door and went to the elevator. Stephen remembered the feeling from yesterday when the elevator touched down. Stepping into the elevator, Stephen pressed the button. Again, the unpleasant feeling in his lower abdomen visited him. Once outside, they moved towards a small cafe that was across the street from them. A great breakfast and a good vibe waiting for them around the corner. Over breakfast, Stephen tried to determine the quickest way to get to First University. Camille trusted him and knew he would do a better job at this task. After finishing breakfast, Stephen waited for his beloved to finish her coffee so they could drive. The shortest and quickest way was to call a cab, which they did. When they reached the massive building, Stephen paid the cab driver and they got out of the car. Crowds of young people were going in and out of the university building. Camille caught a slight uneasiness. She clung to her boyfriend and stepped inside. Taking a folder of papers, she kissed Stephen and entered the admissions office. 40 minutes passed, she walked out. The smile on her face was brightening. There was a creative assignment, and I was able to do it. In fact, I think they liked me. Good for you. You were the first one out. I knew you could do it. The second university isn't too far away. We can walk to it, take a little stroll. As they left the building, they admired its size. Camille held her boyfriend's hand and followed him. They walked a few blocks, past a beautiful park with fountains, a small alley, and a group of street musicians playing. The rest of the way, Camille hummed the motif of that song. They'd reached the second university. Several blocks of one building opened before their eyes. Stephen escorted his favorite audience and himself flew to a small flower stall, which he saw when they passed the alley. After buying a bouquet of daisies, he ran in the opposite direction. As soon as he entered the university from the door of the auditorium, Camille appeared. He ran up to her and gave her the flowers. Camille blushed in surprise. "But how did you do on the assignment? I see you weren't the first one out this time." "It's okay. Yes, it's fine. Thank you for the flowers. They're very beautiful. The assignment was harder this time, and the teachers were more demanding. But I was able to complete the assignment. Good for you. Now we get on the bus. We go to the last university, and we are free." They left the building, and the bus stop was in front of the university. The bus approached. Getting on it, Camille sat in an empty seat, and Stephen stood next to her. After 5 stops, they went outside. The warm sun was shining. Camille was walking and smelling the flowers. When they reached the building, they saw a map on it. The location of the whole buildings were scattered on several streets. The main building is a small building with sculptures. At the entrance to this university, Stephen was not allowed in, and he stayed outside waiting for his girlfriend. A warm summer breeze swayed the leaves on the trees, blowing hats off the passers-by. Stephen sat down on a bench and began to look around. Next to him on another bench sat an elderly couple. Stephen knew that in dozens of years, they would also be sitting on a bench in the park and feeding pigeons, and their grandchildren would be running around nearby. Suddenly, Camille approached from the back. She was smiling. Stephen hugged her and began to ask her how it went. "Now we'll wait to see what college I'll be accepted to. I'm sure you'll get into all of them." 3. "But which one will you choose?" "I don't know yet. While there's time, I'll think about it." She took Stephen by the hand, and they walked towards the park. In the park, they walked along the sidewalks, feeding bread to the ducks in the little pond lying on the grass, looking at the clouds floating by. Camille lay on his lap and enjoyed the moments they spent together. In the afternoon, they went to the hotel to change, get everything they needed, and head out to the amusement park. After getting ready, they grabbed a bite to eat and drove to the park. They arrived there. The first thing Camille decided to do was to ride the slides ride. Her hair was standing on end. Camille laughed. She was enjoying it. Walking around the grounds, Stephen noticed the shooting range. Said he'd be back in a minute. He went to win the coveted prize. 10 out of 10 shots. He won a small stuffed rabbit. After taking the rabbit, he ran to his girlfriend to present the gift. At that moment, Camille was studying the park map on the banner. Stephen came up behind her, covered her eyes with his hand, and held the rabbit under her t-shirt. When her sweetheart guessed who had come up behind her, he turned her around and presented her with the toy. She smiled and hugged him. They walked around the park for a few more hours, ate cotton candy, rode the rides, and went to a little show. Stephen took a ride on the dreaded slides. Camille was afraid to go on them. It was not long before evening came, and the lanterns and lights of the park began to come on. The lovers were exhausted. They sat down on a bench and just looked at the night lights of the city in the distance. Camille was hungry, and they headed to a small restaurant to have dinner. Once they arrived at the restaurant, they placed their order, and for the rest of the evening, they just sat and chatted about the future. No one could disturb their idyll. After finishing dinner and paying, they drove to the hotel. The power was out, but the lights in their room went out well past 0 o'clock. For a couple more days, they just relaxed, walking around, having fun, talking. Went a few times to the movies, theaters, museums, but the little vacation was coming to an end. Camille did not want to leave. She wanted to stop time, to stay with her beloved. Back in her hometown, Stephen began to work, and Camille waited for an answer from the institutes. A month later, the answer came. She was accepted to 3 universities she had applied to, but she chose the one she had originally applied to. Stephen was insanely happy for her. In August, they started packing. Camille was packing for the move, and Stephen was packing for the army. They were leaving on the same day, but in different directions. Standing on the platform, Camille did not want to let her boyfriend go. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She was scared to leave alone without him. Stephen hugged Camille's mother and grandmother and went to the train car. He promised to call every minute as soon as he could. A few hours later, Camille was standing on the platform. She was being seen off by her parents, Stephen's mom, and his grandmother. They had been family friends for so many years and knew about the children's attitudes. Stephen had joined the border guard. The service was not a hardship, but there were few phone calls. Camille missed him, sometimes cried, but she waited. Making her own calendar, she crossed off the days that had passed. She excelled in her studies, applied for an increased scholarship. She liked her studies, but she was sad that her loved one was not around. Camille opened her dresser and pulled out her red diploma, and with it a photo album from her last year. How beautiful she was, young. Now she was a grandmother. The knowledge she had gained at university, she remembered every day of her studies. How classmates tried to disrupt her classes. Those were her years of youth, the years of her true and only love. Tired, she sat down in her chair and began to leaf through the album, remembering her classmates and teachers. Many were gone now, but the memory of them would always be there. Leafing through the album, she came across an old photograph. It had dark hair on it, and a guy in a military uniform flipped the photo over. She read from the border with love. "I'll be home soon." This picture had been sent to her by Stephen from the army. Memories came flooding back to her. She remembered vividly the day he had returned. It was a beautiful summer day. Camille was going to meet her beloved from the army. She had come home the other day to meet him. She sat at her small table and put on her makeup. On the table was a mirror on which she had pinned a picture. He had sent it over the winter. The emotion was overwhelming. Would he really come soon? Would she be able to hug him? There were still a couple of hours to go before the train arrived. But Camille already felt that she was late. She had been on her feet since early morning. On this day, she didn't want to be late. She realized that they would have a couple of days and would have to leave again for school. Camille believed that Stephen would leave with her. Suddenly, her mom came into the room. "Are you ready? It's an hour and a half before we get there." I almost didn't notice how the time flew by. "I'll be out of here in a minute, and then we can go." "Okay, we'll be waiting for you downstairs. Hurry up and get dressed and come downstairs." Mom left the room, and Camille began to dress in a frantic hurry. At least there was enough time left to get everything done. She didn't want to be late. Locking the door with the key, she ran down the stairs of her heart, starting to gain momentum of acceleration. Opening the entryway door, she saw her parents talking to Stephen's mom and grandmother. She walked over to them and gave them a hug. Everyone was smiling and joking around. His favorite girl, his future wife, was now by his side. Watching the movie, his eyes began to close and Stephen fell asleep. A couple more days passed, and they were packing their bags again. Camille was on her way to study, and Stephen was on his way after her, having applied to a technical university. He had enrolled as a part-time student as an engineer. After saying goodbye to their parents, they left for new adventures. The first month seemed like hell. Stephen looked for a job, went through dozens of interviews and internships. And one day he got lucky. The director of a large company was interested in his resume. Stephen got a part-time job to work and study at the same time. 2 months later, he proved himself and was transferred to a full-time position. The first session ended well with a few B's and other A's, allowing him to apply for an increased scholarship. On the edge of town, Stephen found a nice apartment, taking Camille with him. They had moved out of their dorms. Family life didn't seem so difficult. Stephen often gave flowers and gifts, and Camille cooked deliciously and kept the house and her future husband's head clean and organized. Stephen was a hard-working guy. He did not refuse to work extra hours and stayed late. That's why his boss saw him as a prospect. In the winter, Stephen was promoted. With small steps, he was moving towards his dream. He knew that a couple years would pass and everything would be perfect. On the weekends, he took work home. Camille would see him working and just be right next to him in the same room. Stephen gave all of his free time from work to his beloved. Several times they traveled home. One day, Stephen's parents raised the question of the wedding date. Camille replied that they wanted a summer wedding in their small rented apartment. Stephen made a box and cut holes in it. After his paycheck, he saved money for the wedding. Time flew inexorably forward. Camille worked on the design assignments she had been given at school. Stephen spent days at work. The box was slowly filling up. Camille had always wanted a princess wedding. She envisioned herself in a lush white dress and her fiancé in a beautiful black suit. She didn't know then how much pain and disappointment the man she loved could bring. The end of spring was approaching. The lovers were preparing for summer exams. Camille finished her projects, and Stephen sat with his textbooks. Having passed the exams, they began to prepare for the wedding. Choosing a restaurant took a lot of time. Camille wanted her wedding to be the best. Camille and her friends went shopping and picked out a dress. The wedding date was set for the end of July. Camille was looking forward to the date like a little child. The routine of preparations consumed the lovers, but they were happy. No one could think that the communication of a little girl and a bully will turn into a lifetime. Camille decided on the restaurant where the wedding would be held. Having made an appointment with the administrator, she left to socialize. In the meantime, he picked out his suit. He knew he was getting married once and for life. Excitement overwhelmed him. He was afraid of doing something wrong. Not even in the army was as scary as getting ready for a wedding. The long-awaited day came. Camille sat at her small table and put on her makeup. Her friend's mom sat next to her. Excitement overwhelmed her. She was very nervous. Stephen left in the morning to finish the final preparations for the day. His mom and grandmother came into town, two people who had been through a lot to get him back on his feet. Meeting them at the train station, he drove them home and left. Camille, having met the groom's parents, was happy to see them. Emily told stories from her wedding with her father Stephen. They laughed a lot, and the feeling of excitement was gone. Camille was ready. At the appointed time, they began to walk outside. The bride got into a stolen car driven by her father. Upon reaching the registry office, Camille almost cried, but managed to hold back her tears. Her father took her hands and kissed her. "You look beautiful today. I am happy for you that you have found the man you will walk through life with. You are the best. I just want you to know that. From now on, you're gonna have a different last name. You will have your own family, but you will always be my little daughter to me." Dad got out of the car and opened the door for Camille, helped her out with a summer breeze, picked me up. She was excited for the first time in her life. She was getting married. A few friends came up to her and started asking her about her condition. She had finally calmed down. There was no reason to be nervous anymore. People gradually flocked inside the building, settling into their seats. They talked about the lives of the young ones. The groom was already standing at the altar. He was visibly nervous, but tried to hide it as much as possible. When all the people were seated, the solemn music played. Camille entered the hall with her father on her arm. She smiled, a little embarrassed by the large number of people looking at her. Father was walking and holding back tears, and he was a series of tasks. The mom, sitting in the front row, was also crying. Finally, their children were becoming one family. Her father walked her down the aisle, kissed her hand, and left for his seat next to Camille's mom. The registrar began to speak. It was as if the couple in love didn't notice her. They looked into each other's eyes and thought of escaping from here as soon as possible. The registrar asked the main question, "Camille, do you agree to marry Stephen?" "I do." "And do you, Stephen, agree to marry Camille?" "I do. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife." The whole room applauded. Mothers cried, friends shouted, and congratulated. A chorus shouted bitterly. The newlywed couple merged into kisses. Invited guests began to come up and congratulate them. Camille felt an indescribable emotion. After the registration, they headed to the restaurant. All afternoon and evening, Camille and Stephen listened to congratulations from everyone. They had fun, participated in contests from the Toastmaster. Tons of gifts were accepted. Grandma gave the most touching speech about the young couple's life. Even Stephen could not hold back tears. Everyone was having fun, singing, dancing, congratulating the young ones. At night, the young went to the central square to meet the dawn with friends. Camille looked indescribable in the rays of the morning sun. Stephen could not take his eyes off her. He went over and kissed her. Meeting the dawn, they went to their hotel room to spend that night just the two of them. The tender, passionate cries of the young ones echoed outside the hotel door. They were savoring these moments. They were having a good time together. No one could ever interrupt their idyll. A couple of days later, Stephen accompanied his mother and grandmother to the train. Camille couldn't make it. Stephen knew that now everyone would be gone and a new work week would begin. After seeing his parents off, he headed towards home. On the way, he bought a small bouquet of daisies, came home, and gave it to his beloved. Camille had been sitting at her school books all day. When she saw the flowers, she got excited and took her mind off her books. Stephen suggested going for a walk. The weather was beautiful outside. After thinking about it, Camille agreed. She enjoyed spending time with her favorite person. They left the house and went for a walk along the embankment. Stephen bought his wife some cotton candy, which she loved so much. When they came to an ice cream stand, Stephen bought 2 popsicles. Camille loved to smear Stephen's nose with ice cream. All afternoon they walked along the promenade. In the evening it got a little colder. Stephen put his sweater on Camille and they went into a small cafe. After dinner, they moved towards home. Camille did not want to go home. Her school books and notebooks were waiting for her at home. The next day, Stephen left for work in the morning. At lunchtime, Camille left the apartment. She was a little late for her classes. She closed the door and flew to the university. In the afternoon, Stephen was called in by his boss. "Hi, Stephen. You're new to the company and you're doing well. After consulting with my colleagues, I've decided to promote you to deputy head of department. You can pack your bags and move into office 1428. Thank you, John. I won't let you down. I'll have the project ready this week. The financial reports for the project are in and waiting to be signed." "Good. Okay. I'll check in with you today. But you get packed up and move to the 14th floor. Stephen came out of the study. He was glowing with happiness. The first thing he did was to call Camille and tell her what had happened. At that time, she was running in search of the right classroom. Stephen said they would discuss everything at home, wished her a good day and hung up. All day, Stephen carried documents in boxes from office to office. The way was several floors, but it did not scare him. He walked up and down the stairs. The elevator was a long wait. In the old office, he packed his things into boxes, knowing that he would have to put them back on the shelves again later. He liked the new office from the 14th floor. It had a great view of the city. From this floor, people seemed tiny. The little passing cars would pile up in traffic. It was funny to watch. The day flew by. My arms were falling off. Stephen decided to use the elevator to go downstairs. When he got into the elevator and pressed the button, the doors were about to close, when some girl shouted for him to support the elevator door like a true gentleman. He managed to stop the door. A beautiful girl entered the elevator. He tried to remember who it was, but in the time he had been working for the company, he had never seen her once. A tall blonde in heels stood in front of him. Jacket and skirt looked great in combination. He took his eyes off her and began to look at the brochure on the elevator wall as he exited the building and got into his car. The girl's silhouette wouldn't leave his mind. He couldn't figure out what it was that she could have gotten him hooked on. At that moment, the phone rang. It was a message from his wife. She was asking when he was coming home. Thoughts of the girl slipped from his mind. Stephen started the engine and headed home. Upon entering the house, Stephen smelled odors coming from the kitchen. He took off his jacket and headed there. Camille was standing at the stove. He walked up behind her and kissed her neck. She smiled. "Hi, honey. How was your day? How's your new office? Tell me about it. I'm wondering what my husband does now, aren't I? Wash your hands and sit at the table," Stephen washed his hands and went back to the kitchen. There was pasta in a bowl on the table. He sat down at the table. His wife sat across from him. It's been a hard day. I'm very tired of running from one floor to another. I'm now the deputy head of the department. Essentially, the duties are the same, but now there are more people under my command. The office is large, spacious. It has a beautiful view. Would you like it? My bosses appreciate me. I'll finish my project this week and start a new job. How about you? How was your day? From what I heard, you were late for school again today. You know how long I'm in the shower. I can't help it. I'm doing great at school. I finished my term paper today. By the way, I'd already chosen my thesis advisor. It's the teacher who took my test when I entered. He's a jolly little man who tells stories from his life. But when it comes to his subject, he's strict and attentive. When they had eaten, Stephen helped wash the dishes, while Camille cleared the table. After dinner, Camille decided to turn on some movie, and Stephen went to shower under hot water. He remembered that silhouette of the girl again. Something about her clung to him on that. Trying to forget, he stepped out of the shower. The room was quiet. The television was broadcasting almost silently. Stephen walked over to his wife and saw that she was curled up and sleeping peacefully. Stephen picked her up in his arms and carried her into the room. He went back to the hall, opened his laptop, and started to finish the project. At 2:00, his eyes began to close, but Stephen wanted to finish the project. He heard a balloon and footsteps on the floor. Turning around, he saw his wife. She could barely open her eyes, was wrapped in her favorite blanket already 2:00. Let's go to bed. I woke up and you're not around. Let's call it a night. Finishing her sentence, she looked at her husband with a loving gaze. There were no options left. Stephen saved the file and closed the laptop. Picking his wife up on his arm, he left with her for the bedroom. The nasty sound of the alarm clock interrupted his sleep. Stephen woke up. His body was still asleep, but he had to get up. His wife was quiet, howling beside him. He kissed her and went to wash his face. When he washed his face, he went to the kitchen to make himself some coffee. Putting the turka on the stove, he waited for the coffee to boil, poured it into his mug, took some milk from the refrigerator, poured it into the coffee. The coffee allowed him to open his eyes. The body was triggered. Outside the window was rainy weather. It was freezing. Stephen opened the window to let the smell of ozone fill his apartment. An extraordinary odor filled the dwelling. Stephen went into the room. His wife was still asleep, having taken everything he needed from the closet, and he went into the hall. Putting on his suit, he drank his coffee and went to the exit. Taking the elevator down, he got into the parking lot. The car was parked right in front of the elevator exit. Stephen started the engine, turned on some music, and just sat there listening to the morning news on the radio. He pulled out of the parking lot. There was a large congestion of cars gathering on the road because of the nasty weather. There was just enough time to make sure he wouldn't be late. He decided to bypass the small traffic jam and turn to a gas station. After paying for gas, he bought another glass of coffee. It was a sleepy morning. He hadn't felt like this in a long time. When he got into his car, he started the engine and drove towards work. Parked his car. He got out and met his new colleagues in the sector. "Hey, boss. So, what are the first orders of the day?" The men laughed. Stephen picked up their mood and laughed too. "Guys, I'm not your boss. Just because I got promoted doesn't mean anything. We're working at the same pace. One of these days we'll get the paperwork signed, and I'll finish the project." And then the stranger from yesterday caught their attention. She got out of her car and headed toward the exit. There was a moment of silence in the company of men. Their gazes were fixed on her. As she passed by, she said hello and smiled. The company reciprocated and greeted her as well. As she stepped into the elevator, Stephen decided to see who it was. "Now, Robert, you know everyone in the office. Who is she? What department is she from?" "It's just that when I left work yesterday, she was leaving the elevator from the 14th floor too. Robert just shrugged. He wondered who she was. Kevin jumped in. That's the new girl from the billing department. She recently transferred to us from another branch. They say she's a head case to get things done. She's right. She was on the 14th floor yesterday. They have an office around the corner from your door. It's 8:50 on the clock. The guys crowd the elevator. As they cracked jokes, they started their new day at work. Camille woke up at 10 o'clock. Her husband had long since left for work. The wonderful smell of ozone and coffee was flying through the house. She took a little turn. Stephen had forgotten to close the window. She didn't like to be cold. Threw a blanket over herself. She moved out to close the window. There were no pairs at the university today. She'd done all her homework. She decided to take a day off. True, her lover wasn't around to take a complete break from the daily routine. She made herself breakfast, picked up her favorite book, and sat down at the table. The combination of her favorite food and a book was insanely appealing to her. After finishing her breakfast, she tore herself away from the book and began to clear the table. Outside the window, the rain intensified. She loved this kind of weather. It was overcast, raining. There was something about this day that was so indescribably romantic. She searched the TV for her show she'd left off last weekend. Lightning began to flash outside the window. Loud peals of thunder flew over the city. All the stronger ones plunged into the blankets, found her soap opera, tucked the book under the pillow, and started watching. Stephen sorted the remaining things out of the boxes, arranged everything in its order. He sat down to work. There was nothing left to finish the project. In the sweat of his brow, he would finish it in a couple days, and he would take on new projects, but in a different position. He didn't know how to confess. He wasn't raised that way. He knew that if he ever became a boss, he'd still talk to the guys he came to work with at the same time. The clock showed that it was time for lunch break. But Stephen didn't notice it. He continued to sit at his desk and finish the project. His phone rang. It was Robert. "Hi. What are you? Eating office paper or shelf dust? Come on out. We're waiting for you. You got 5 minutes, or are we all gonna have to sit on paper and dust and water today? I've earned it all." "No, go on without me. I grabbed a coffee in the office and I'm fine. There's only a few sheets left. Maybe I'll finish it today." "Well, if you decide to finish it today, you let us know so we can get the rest of the master's signatures." "Yeah, sure. You'll be the first to know." "Oh, great. Have you changed your mind about lunch yet?" "No, it's fine. You're without me today, but okay." Stephen hung up and heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone hadn't left for lunch either. He didn't think much of it. He went to work on the project with renewed vigor. 4 pages and a few signatures separated him from success. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. When it opened, it was the girl he had met yesterday in the elevator. "Good afternoon again, Stephen. We haven't met. I'm new to the billing department. I've been sent to sign some estimates. Girls, they've been emailed to you. And you're not saying a word. I'm Evelyn, by the way. Nice to meet you. Evelyn, since we're on a first-name basis, you can call me Stephen." Yeah, sorry. I forgot about the mail. Would it be easier for you if I signed this way or electronically? It doesn't really make any difference. But if I'm already here, maybe you could sign this way." He took the folder of documents from her hands and started signing. He didn't know what to talk to her about, and because of that, he signed the documents in complete silence. Evelyn was more determined and spoke. "It's lunchtime. So why you?" "Oh, sorry, why are you sitting here?" Lost track of time. "Finalizing a project. A few pages left. That's why I didn't see the email and forgot about lunch. I think I'll just grab a coffee and get back to work. There's a great coffee shop on the 3rd floor of the building next door. Been there a couple times, which is where I'm headed now. Keep me company. I was thinking of just having coffee from the coffee machine, but since you're recommending it, why not? Then we'll get the paperwork out and we can go." "Yeah, that's a great idea. How do you want it?" "Knock on the door. I'll come out." She nodded and left the office. Stephen was overwhelmed with feelings of unknown origin. When she spoke to him, he was lost. When he came to his senses, he rummaged in his bag for his purse. Then it would be fun to forget all the money and cards. The weather outside was nasty, with gusts of wind knocking umbrellas out of people's hands and hats flying off. It was as if nature was trying to tell him something, but he didn't believe in such moments. A couple minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Stephen stood up, caught his jacket, and left the office. Stephen decided to dilute the situation. Silence with conversation. Great weather outside. What do you think? I agree with you. It's great if you don't go outside. We're lucky that there are passageways between the buildings so we don't have to go outside. How did you get here? I transferred from a small branch. I found my ceiling there, and I'm still getting there. I see you haven't been in one place for long either. A week ago, when I applied for the job, the office was empty. Yeah, well, I used to work on 8, but after I proved myself, I moved to 14. That's not bad. There's the coffee shop. They entered a small cafe that was on the 3rd floor. When they stepped inside, the smell of roasted grains hit their noses. They went to the counter and placed their order. After they ordered, they sat down at a table by the window, both looking out the window and laughing at another umbrella flying from a man. At this time, Camille was sitting at home reading her book, and the desire to get up and do something had completely left her body. She was looking forward to the evening when her beloved husband would arrive from work and they could spend time together before coffee. Stephen and Evelyn began to get ready for work. Again, they had a long walk to the 14th floor of another building. Stephen loved stairs, but Evelyn talked him into taking the elevator ride. He agreed. When they made their way to their building, they called the elevator. Outside, the enemy was beginning to rage. They stepped into the elevator. Stephen pressed the button for the 14th floor, and the elevator touched. For a second, his stomach was at the bottom of the elevator cab. In so many years, he still couldn't get used to this kind of ride. A thunderstorm hit the transformer. The lights in the entire building went out for a second. The elevator car stopped. A second later, the emergency power to the entire building and the elevator cab lights came back on. Communication was fading, and there wasn't enough to reach anyone. Half the staff was now still at lunch. Jenna's chances of rescue in the shortest possible time were minimal. Stephen pressed the call button for the dispatcher, but no one answered. The dispatcher had apparently left for lunch as well. One could only hope that security would see the error and check the elevator for people. The dim lighting was reminiscent of the old light from the bulb in his room when he was a kid. Stephen noted the 13:27 time the elevator was stuck. He decided to speak up to lighten the mood. Evelyn, how are you doing? All right? Yeah, I'm fine. Except for the fact that we're stuck and there's no one to rescue us. In this weather, we can't wait for the elevator guys to get here and open this elevator. We're out of options, so let's sit on the floor and wait to be rescued. She sat down in the corner of the elevator. Stephen sat down across from her. She appeared sad. It was starting to get cold in the elevator car. The air conditioners weren't working either. Stephen took off his jacket and slipped it over Evelyn's shoulders. She smiled back. They were silent for a moment. Stephen tried to think of a topic of conversation, but nothing came to mind. In the dim light, he tried to get a good look at the girl. She had long, beautiful white hair, eyes he couldn't see no matter how hard he tried. The wind howled through the elevator shaft. Looking down at the floor, Stephen noticed that Evelyn was looking at him too. Stephen, it's almost 2:00 p.m. Try calling someone again. I will. Stephen got to his feet and started pressing the dispatcher's call button. There was no response to his calls. Stephen tried banging on the elevator car so that someone would hear him, but his attempts were unsuccessful. It was getting cold in the elevator car. She'd always dreamed of spending all day in an iron coffin. At least there's company. I'm really cold. Why don't you sit next to me so you won't be so cold? Stephen moved from one side of the elevator to the other, where Evelyn was sitting. She was shaking. Stephen thought of nothing better than to put his arms around her. After a couple minutes, she stopped shaking. An hour of confinement passed. No one responded to the banging and shouting. Tension and fear were gradually building. Evelyn clutched more and more tightly to Stephen. He, too, was beginning to freeze, but he did not give any sign. Once their gazes met, Evelyn smiled and turned her head away from him. Stephen became frightened. What if he did something terrible that he would regret for the rest of his life? Evelyn lay on top of him. Stephen began to warm little by little, and he forgot about his bad thoughts that were visiting him. An hour and a half after they were stuck, dispatch answered the phone. But just as Evelyn had said, due to bad weather, the wizards couldn't reach them. The director sent the staff home. A dispatcher who was trying to call the foreman and 2 inmates in the elevator remained in the building. It was past 200 hours of confinement. The wind was forgetting heavily in the elevator shaft. Evelyn was looking into his eyes again. And then something happened that for the rest of his life he would regret. Something that for the rest of his life he would regret. She kissed him, and he didn't kiss her back. After a couple more seconds, she kissed him again, but more passionately. For a second, his brain turned off the light, and when it returned, Stephen was kissing Evelyn in return. Passion possessed them. Now they forgot they were cold. They were tearing things off each other. She kissed his neck on the lips, going lower. It felt good. He held her from behind by her hair. Evelyn was moaning. Stephen couldn't stop. He held her breasts and she begged for more. An hour later, they started to get dressed. Stephen's mind was a mess. What had he done? How had this happened? Why exactly was he stuck in the elevator with her? The dispatcher replied that the crew had arrived and would release them now. A moment later, the elevator doors opened and they were released. Evelyn handed Stephen his jacket and winked. All evening he couldn't come to his senses. When he was in the elevator, he felt good. But now he was writhing in anger at himself for what he had done. While his wife slept peacefully at home, he had betrayed her. Pulling into the parking lot, he sat in the car for a long time, hesitant to get out. After gathering his strength, he got out of the car and walked towards the stairs, opening the apartment door. On the threshold, he saw his wife. She was standing there smiling. He smiled back at her and hugged her, kissing her. Going into the bathroom, he looked at his reflection. It seemed disgusting to him. He got out of the bathroom and went to change. Camille noticed something wrong when he came out of the room. She asked, "Honey, are you okay? You've been weird today. You haven't been answering your cell phone. What happened? Tell me." "It's not a big deal. It's just a lightning strike knocked out a transformer today. And I was in the elevator for hours. I was freezing cold and tired. I'm sorry I couldn't answer the phone. I was losing the connection. It's okay. Why don't I give you a hot bath?" "No, thanks. If you don't mind, let's go to bed early tonight." "Okay." She finished her sentence, kissed him, and went to the couch to watch the show. Stephen headed toward the shower. For about 10 minutes he stood under the boiling water and tried to understand the nature of his actions. He had never been attracted to other girls. He was in love and faithful to only one. But what was it today? How dare he decide to take such a dastardly step? All night long he couldn't close his eyes. The picture of what happened in the elevator flashed before his eyes. His wife was sleeping peacefully beside him. Looking at her, he hated himself. It was only towards morning that he was able to fall asleep. When he woke up in the morning, he had no energy. He called his boss and said that because of yesterday's incident he had a cold and would stay home to work. The supervisor agreed and Stephen hung up the phone. Camille had gone to the university in the morning. Stephen was left alone with his thoughts. All day long he had been finishing his project, but he could not get over yesterday's incident. He promised that he would never take such a step again. He didn't know what fate had in store for him. All day long he sat alone. He rarely answered messages or calls. Evening came. He realized it was getting dark outside and called Camille. She was just about to dial him. "Hey, where are the couples over to pick you up?" Hi. Yeah, we're out. No, love, don't come. My friend's driving me home. How are you feeling better? You scared me last night. I came in dead tired. I'm worried about you. Be careful. Okay, I'll wait for you at home. Come home soon. 20 minutes later, she came home. The smile never left her face. She jumped on top of her husband and started kissing him. It helped a little to forget yesterday's situation. They spent the whole evening together like they used to, watching TV, eating all sorts of goodies and being happy together. This evening helped Stephen to sleep properly. He felt good with his wife. The next morning he was going to work. His strength was overflowing. After completing his morning ritual, alarm clock, shower and coffee, he left the apartment. The mood was combative. Today he wanted to finish a project and take on something new. When he pulled into the parking lot of his work, he noticed his coworkers. They were standing around gossiping before work as usual. He got out of the car and headed in their direction. Look, it's our stuck boss. How can you sit in an iron closet without a means of communication? They laughed out loud. Stephen smiled in return. He didn't want to remember what had happened that afternoon. Looking around the parking lot, he did not notice Evelyn's car. He wanted to minimize contact with her as much as possible, but he was stuck. It's not that big of a deal. And I'll see how you feel when you're in that situation. They laughed amicably and went to their workstations. In the afternoon, Stephen finished the project and sent it to his director. In the meantime, Kevin called and told him to collect signatures. A few hours later, Stephen was called into the CEO's office. When he entered the office, he sat down in a chair. Oh, Stephen, I need you. We are sending you on a business trip to Kaliningrad. You will defend your project in front of investors so that they know where their money is invested. I've looked through the documentation. It's well written. Well done. Keep it up. You'll be leaving the day after tomorrow. You don't have to come to work tomorrow. Get some rest. There's a conference on Saturday. Hotel and transportation will be paid by the branch, so don't be afraid to go. Now, excuse me, I have an urgent call. Rising from the director's chair, he went to a far room and argued with someone. After the conversation, Stephen was going to go home to rest for a couple days and hit the road. He took the stairs down to the parking lot, counting each step, texting his wife that he would be home soon. He received a heartfelt text in reply. On the way home, he stopped at a flower store and bought a gorgeous bouquet. When he arrived home, Camille had not yet returned from her studies. He decided while she was gone, he would have time to take a shower. While he was in the shower, Camille came home. She saw the gorgeous bouquet and heard the sounds from the shower. With the speed of a bullet, she undressed and ran to him. The unexpected encounter shocked him. They started kissing. Stephen was biting her neck, pressing her against the wall. Love blazed in his chest. When they got out of the shower, Stephen decided to have a serious talk with his beloved. I am sent on a business trip for a few days to Kaliningrad. I hope you don't mind my departure. I handed in my project today, and the director liked it. He's sending me to a conference to defend it. I want investors to like it, so they'll take it. Okay, I'm gonna miss you a lot, but trust that you'll beat me. Call me every day. I'll always find time to answer you. They spent 2 days together. Stephen did the packing. Camille took her homework home to spend her last days with her lover. She had little time to spend with him, and she wanted to fly away with him but couldn't. Her studies kept her busy all day. They lay on the couch and watched movies. Stephen would order food so he wouldn't waste time cooking. Camille laughed a lot. It had been a long time since she had been with her lover for such a long time. It was the day of departure. Camille had left for her couple's flight in the morning, but they had time to say goodbye. Stephen hailed a cab and packed the last of his belongings in his bag. The hour ride to the airport through traffic flew by. Stephen paid and walked towards the airport. After passing through security, he entered the main waiting room. In his head, he was thinking about how he would present his project to the investors. In his head, the picture of this conference was forming perfectly. He was confident in himself and his project. When they announced that the plane was boarding passengers, Stephen got up from the couch and walked toward the checkpoint. After checking his boarding pass, Stephen was already walking down the ramp to the plane. A couple of moments, and the plane is already in the sky. Stephen unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned back, and fell asleep. A few hours later, he was awakened by the flight attendant and asked to buckle up and raise the backrest. A soft landing. Stephen was already met by a young guy with his first and last name on a sign. He invited Stephen into his car and took him to the hotel. Stephen, tired from the flight, went into the room and immediately fell on the bed. He slept until the evening. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Stephen woke up with one eye, looked at the door, and could not understand whether he was dreaming or not. Then there was another knock on the door. He went to the door and opened it. When he saw the person standing behind the door, Stephen was ready to fall under the ground. Standing behind the door was Evelyn. Her long white hair covered part of her face. You could tell by the look on her face that she was happy to see him. "Hi. I missed you. That day spent in the elevator is keeping me busy. I fell in love with you every day. You're all I think about. Let me pass." "Yeah, hi." "Sure, go ahead." When he saw her, he forgot how to talk again. She was wearing a red, slinky evening gown. Passion flashed in his eyes. The world ceased to exist for him. "Evelyn, why are you the one? I don't mean my number, but in general, I, like you, came to defend a project, but not written by me, but a regular old project to confirm its relevance." Stephen couldn't help himself. He walked over to her and kissed her passionately on the lips. He was blown away. Clothes flew in all directions. Screams, moans, notes, passions of love came from behind the door. He realized that once again he had snapped, but he couldn't do anything about it. A couple hours passed, both of them exhausted. They collapsed on the bed. The urge to talk was there, but there was no energy to do so. Waking up in the morning to the alarm clock, Stephen went to shower as usual, not noticing the mayhem of last night's lovemaking. As he adjusted the water and stood under the stream, someone touched him from behind with cold hands. It was Evelyn. She began kissing him, moving lower and lower. There was plenty of time before the conference started, and they could afford to love each other at this moment. Stephen couldn't stop. He felt different with her. They did not leave his room until the evening. Not infrequent screams came from the room. Before the conference, they showered and began to pack. Stephen put on his best suits, prepared his laptop. When he was called, he went on stage and began to broadcast about his project. You could see from the investors' faces that they were interested. Stephen's speech lasted 15 minutes. He left to great applause. Evelyn spoke much later than he did. In order not to waste time, he went to his room to call the director. As he walked down the hall, he called the director and told him that everything had gone excellently, and perhaps his project would be approved on the basis of the company's work. Make arrangements with the director. He decided to call his wife and make her happy. The dial tone went on, but no one picked up. Stephen, while entering the room, when Camille answered, Stephen stood in a stupor. The whole room was turned upside down. Clothes were lying on the floor underneath. Women's underwear was almost everywhere. Stephen came the realization that for almost 2 days he had not left the room with her, that he had lost his mind again. But then he heard his wife's voice. "Hello, honey, you're there. And I've been telling you for a minute. I can hear it's you." "Yeah. Hello, sweetheart. I'm doing great. My project is about to be approved. And I'm really glad I came here. I miss you. I miss you very much. I'll be there soon." Before Camille could answer, the connection was lost. When Stephen tried to call, nothing happened. Forgetting everything, Stephen began to clean and put his room in order. When the conference was over, people went to the banquet room. They were drinking, talking. Evelyn tried to find Stephen, but could not. She decided to check his room. When she knocked, she noticed the door was open. In the room, Stephen was cleaning up a mess of consequences, passion, and love. Gone somewhere. I'm tired of looking for you. Something's happened. Sit down, please. I need to talk to you. When I'm around you, I forget how to breathe. I enjoy spending time with you immensely. But I'm married in the city. My wife is waiting for me at home. I'm sorry. I can't see you anymore. I know you're married. That doesn't stop me. I love you and I don't want you to give up on me. I promise I'll make you happier. Stephen didn't say anything. He just left the room and went for a walk around the city at night. Little cars flew through the narrow streets. He realized that he was being an idiot, but he didn't want to lose them both. When they flew in from the conference, they began to meet often, either in his office or in his car in the parking lot. When he came home, he would forget about Evelyn and spend time with his wife. This continued until Camille began to notice her husband's strange behavior. He would come home very tired from work. The perpetual smell of perfume from his suit and feminine hair was alarming. For winter vacation, Camille offered to go for a ride to her parents' house, but Stephen couldn't go. No matter how much Camille urged him, she agreed to go alone. But Stephen promised to come back in a few days. On the day Camille left, her husband behaved strangely all morning, walking around with his phone, just swearing. When she approached Camille, she was scared. She didn't know what was going on. They said goodbye. Stephen left for work, and Camille waited for the time to call a cab and leave for the train station. Before leaving, she decided to clean up a little. She decided to vacuum her room. She started in the corners and gradually moved to the bed. But her attention was attracted by an object under the bed. When she pulled it out, she was horrified. It was someone's blue panties. She knew she didn't have such underwear in her closet. Anger overwhelmed her. She wanted to call her husband and tell him, but she guessed why her husband was acting like this. She decided to wait for them. She hid the suitcase on the balcony and sat on the sofa. But when she heard the key in the door turn and ran to her room, finding someone else's panties under the bed, the wife hid in the closet to incriminate her husband. And when she saw who came to him, she fell out of there with her mouth open. She recognized her. It was her cousin Evelyn. All their lives they'd been rivals. But this was crossing all boundaries. She saw their faces, picked up her suitcase from the balcony, and walked towards the exit. On the street, Stephen caught her. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. In silly ways, he tried to stop her, but he couldn't. She, proudly raising her head, walked forward. She had already figured it all out for herself. She just wanted to leave, to go home to her parents. Tears were falling from her face in hail, but she walked straight ahead without listening to the sounds her husband was making. She had gone home and didn't want to go back, but because of her studies she was able to get over herself. She never told anyone what had happened or where Stephen was. To such questions she just shrugged her shoulders. That's how the month flew by. In the city, the exams were approaching and Camille was about to go. When she arrived in the city, the first thing she did was to rent an apartment. 4 days in a row she went to her exams and closed out with a perfect score. Every day Stephen would snip her phone. Every minute he was calling, texting, but she couldn't answer. She wanted a quiet life, but she loved him very much. She couldn't forget that little boy in tattered pants with the broken knees and elbow. The boy who loved math but sometimes misunderstood how to solve it. She loved him madly. She didn't want to think about how and what had happened between her sister and him. On nights, heartbreaking screams echoed in her apartment. She didn't know what she wanted for herself. On the one hand, a lover she had spent half her life with. On the other, a man who had sneakily betrayed her. At the same time, Stephen called another 100 times. After that fateful day, he did not see Evelyn. She tried to meet, went to his home at work, but could get no answers. He had withdrawn far into himself, working, studying. But when he came home, he tried every possible way to reach her, talked to her girlfriends and friends. But nothing gave confidence. After dialing another classmate of his wife's, he got a reply. He found out where Camille was living now. She lived a few blocks away from him. After work, he drove to the address, locating her window by the apartment number. He waited for the lights to come on so he could go and talk to her. Several hours passed. Dusk was descending on the city. There were fewer and fewer people on the street. Stephen didn't know what to do. He just sat and waited. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't go on without her. Camille had been standing in that yard for a long time. She saw the car and her husband. She didn't dare to go home. But in her mind, two camps were warring, love and hate. She frantically froze, insisted on going. She hesitated to go. He might not have noticed her, but suddenly he would. Several hours passed like that. Stephen continued to call and write. Camille did not answer him. She just wanted to be alone for a while. Alone, she wanted to rest and sort herself out. She knew she would never find another man like Stephen again, but she was scared to start all over again. Gathering all her willpower into a fist, she walked toward the car. Opening the door, she got into her seat and turned on the heater. Stephen was silent, but he wanted to speak. Camille beat him to it. You know, there's good and evil in me right now. Evil is telling me to run away from you, and good says to try to give you one last chance. Just understand one thing. I loved you madly. I would have given my life for you, but you betrayed me. I didn't want to come back here. After that meeting, I moved back in with my parents. No one knows about our relationship. I've been thinking a lot, and I don't know what decision to make. Just give me some time. I can't concentrate when you call 100 times a day. And I hear you. I won't call you anymore. I won't bother you. Please, just give me one last chance. I love you very much. You're my one and only. I hope you understand me. Take me home. Know that if we live together, it doesn't mean anything. Don't you dare touch me. It's a deal. Stephen nodded silently. A fire of emotions raged inside. He was simultaneously glad to have her around, and he was hurt that he had failed her now in the hardest part of keeping her rules. He was afraid of failing and snapping. Well, then she would go. Camille, falling asleep in the car first. The city was intentionally stuck in traffic, advancing on the subway. Stephen looked at his wife and was glad she was there. In all that time, he would never think of her sister again. Not until decades from now, when he would get his hands on a picture of his aunt holding Camille and Camille's mom holding Evelyn. When they reached home, Stephen didn't want to wake her. He carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, picked her up in his arms, and carried her home. At home, he put her on the bed and went to change his clothes. When Camille woke up, she realized that the bed was different. Stephen, in moments of rage, had torn up all the furniture that could in any way remind him of Evelyn. He wanted her out of his life. For 2 months, he lived alone. A lot of things changed in his life during that time. He changed the furniture, renovated the apartment at work for a project, and became the lead director of Evelyn's branch. Evelyn never showed up for work again. She quit her job and transferred back to her branch. Where did she come from? Camille smelled coffee and left the room. Stephen sat with his back to her and drank coffee. He didn't know what he could do. He sat there thinking, but when he realized that the mug that was next to him was gone, he turned around. Camille was standing behind him and drinking coffee from the mug. At that moment, he wanted to run up, take her in his arms, and kiss her, but he was afraid to. For the next month, every day after work and school, Stephen picked up Camille and they drove to the marriage counselor's office. Stephen was ashamed, but he overcame himself and went for a long time. Camille did not let Stephen near her, but knew that he had not changed. Often he brought goodies, gave her flowers, spent time with her. She could see he was trying, but she couldn't let it all go and start trusting again. She was afraid he might snap again, but she believed in him. They started spending more time with her parents. Every weekend they visited them. Her parents hinted at grandchildren. Camille just laughed and nodded her head. She was on the road to trusting her husband. Stephen began to take frequent business trips, but not alone. He always took his wife with him, so she knew he was alone. When he agreed to her rules, he knew what he was getting into. He knew she might not begin to trust, but he rejoiced like a child every day they lived together. They began to travel a lot. Every 6 months, a new country. Camille learned several languages and was fluent in English. She was interested to hear what Stephen chatted about with his foreign colleagues. She loved the Museum of Art. When Stephen signed another contract, she spent hours walking through museums, exhibitions, loved to go to the opera and ballet. Sometimes Stephen would go with her. Rarely there were moments when she remembered the past. She cried a lot. Stephen saw this, and at such moments she just wanted to be alone. Such moments he would make her coffee and leave the room. If she asked, he would stay. They were madly in love and didn't want to lose each other. Yes, the psychologist Camille stayed at home a lot and did not go out anywhere except for her studies. The psychologist gave her a little confidence in herself and in her choice. At first, Stephen used to take off work early to be close by. Gradually, he evened out his work schedule. He was confident that she was okay. She began to trust gradually. He started going out more. Stephen took her to that amusement park they had been to for the first time a few years ago. He was insanely pleased when she laughed. She was starting her life over again. Stephen would wake up many times in his life in a cold sweat and with the fear that he was alone. One day, Camille came home in a good mood, cooked a lovely dinner, bought some beautiful new lacy lingerie, and decided to please her husband. Stephen did not know about it. After saying goodbye to his colleagues, he got into his car and drove home. On the way, he stopped at a flower shop. He bought a small bouquet and drove home. He pulled into the parking lot, parked his car, and got out. He didn't like elevators. That's why he walked home by taking the stairs every day. He walked to the door and started to open it with his keys. His wife was already preparing a surprise. When he opened the door, he was amazed. In the hall in the middle of the room was a table with a fine dinner on it. Candles were burning. Camille had put on some music. Camille looked extraordinary. She was wearing a transparent robe. Under the robe, the beautiful lingerie was visible. The evening went unusually well. My husband liked Camille's presence. She was also delighted. A few days passed after the dinner and Camille became ill at home. Unexplained symptoms appeared in her. She was frightened and went to the hospital. Stephen did not know anything. At the doctor's appointment, she was told that she was going to be a mom. She was happy, but would Stephen be happy? In the evening, she decided to talk to him about it. Stephen came home earlier than usual, took a shower, and started working at home. Camille came up to him and spoke to him. "Can I distract you for a second?" Stephen pushed the computer away and had his full attention. "Here's the thing. I'm slowly learning to trust you again. You're there for me every day, and I appreciate it. You and I fly to other countries a lot, and we go to my parents' house more often. Thank you. Yes, sometimes I get mad at you, but just know that I love you madly and do not want to lose you. You're doing great, becoming a top director, getting a college degree, and always in development. I'm afraid to tell you one thing. I only found out about it today. As you are my favorite, I'm pregnant." Hearing these words, Stephen felt like the happiest man on earth. First, he started jumping and screaming. Then he ran up to his wife and started hugging her, started kissing her belly. Camille saw tears in his eyes. He was truly overjoyed at the news. The next month, Stephen prepared the room for the baby, renovated it, bought different furniture. He was insanely excited about the birth of his first child. At night, he would get up and look for fruit at the stores. Even in winter, Camille herself did not know what she wanted. Stephen began to spend all his time with his family. He moved the management of the company off his laptop. He would talk to Camille and joke around, watch movies with her. Sometimes he'd get dragged to a young mom's practice. He gave all his time to his wife. A month before the birth, they drove around the city to clinics and looked for a doctor who would deliver the baby. Stephen could not think how many specialists they would have to go through to find the right doctor. There was a bag at home in case it was not foreseeable, happened, and they needed to leave quickly. And so it happened. Stephen and Camille were sleeping peacefully. Then Stephen wakes up to Camille pushing his arm. "What's wrong? What's the matter? Should I get some water or call an ambulance?" "No, I'm hanging in there. Come on, let's go to the hospital." In a few minutes, Stephen got dressed and carried all the necessary things to the car. Camille took the elevator down and did breathing exercises. Stephen helped her into the car, got in, started the engine himself, and drove to the hospital. Stephen was afraid of being late, but it was scary to drive fast. Camille drove calmly and just breathed while the baby's father was more nervous than she was. She could see him trying, talking to her, but his hands were shaking. About 40 minutes passed. They pulled into the hospital courtyard. Stephen helped his wife to get out of the car and walk to the hospital. The doctors took her to the maternity ward. Stephen was not allowed in. After 6 o'clock, the doctor came out and said Rich was born. "You can go to your wife's room." Stephen thanked him and went towards her room. When he entered the room, he cried. His son was lying on his wife's chest asleep. He had his mom's facial features and his dad's nose. Stephen kissed his wife and stood looking at them while tears flew from his face and hair. A few days later, Camille and little Sasha were discharged from the hospital. All relatives and friends came to the discharge. The mothers rejoiced that they had become grandmothers, and Stephen became a great-grandmother. She sat down on the bench and cried. Camille's father looked at his grandson and did not want to give him up. The baby smiled as his daddy took him in his arms. At that moment, Stephen realized that in an instant he could lose it. He promised himself that this situation would never happen again, and he would not leave his family alone. Their family was never in trouble again in their lives. The child grew by leaps and bounds. Stephen was busy with his son almost all the time. Stephen worked in the company, a director, spent a lot of time with his family, and was a kind man. A few years later, Camille gave birth to his second child. Stephen loved his children and gave them all the things he did not have as a child. Most importantly, he gave a man's education. After a few years, they began to travel with the children. Sasha found foreign languages easy, but Denmark had only recently begun to learn them. Now she would give anything to see her husband alive. He left very early. No one could think that such a sturdy man's health could fail. That's what happened. He was on his way home from work, called his wife, and warned her that he would be home soon. As usual, he stopped at a flower store, bought a bouquet of daisies, and headed home. But then something went wrong, and he had a heart attack while driving. He drove into a fence. The speed was slow. Kind people pulled him out of the car and called an ambulance. His heart weakened every minute. His wife and children came to the hospital. They looked at him and cried, and he was calming everyone down and telling everyone to calm down, and that he had no regrets about his life, except for one moment. A few days later, he passed away. His heart couldn't take the strain and stopped. Camille cried long and hard, but we can no longer return with tears. When he passed away at their home address, a lawyer came to read the will. In the will, Stephen had many kind words to say about his wife, his children, the employees of his company. He didn't say much about himself, but there was one phrase, "Thank you all, thank you. I have lived a full life and am proud of what I have achieved." Stephen's passing was a tremendous loss to their family. They loved him. He taught his children a lot, raised the company he worked for to unreleased heights. He was a good man. At the funeral, hundreds of people spoke kind words about him. Before he died, he confessed that on the day of the terrible thunderstorm he met Evelyn. They were stuck in an elevator. That's how they met. He called that day the day the earth turned over. It was several years after his death. But Camille never got used to living without him. Every detail in the house reminded her of him. Every picture hanging on the wall told a story. Camille remembered how her husband used to hang those pictures. Several days in a row he'd been meaning to get started, but he'd been distracted either by a call from work or the kids deciding to attack the folder. but he was on his way to his goal. Monday morning, Stephen and his wife sent the kids off to their grandmother's. He turned off his cell phone and got down to business. Camille was in charge of the process. Why did she find herself the culprit from time to time? She knew her husband loved her madly and could put up with her. Camille wanted the pictures to be able to hang evenly throughout the room, not in one spot. Stephen listened patiently to his beloved's task. He pulled out a drill and began drilling into the wall. Dust and plaster flew from the wall in all directions. Camille was already imagining who was going to do the cleaning. After finishing drilling holes in one wall, Stephen started hammering in the hole. The holes were at the same level and the same distance apart. With a quarter of the work done, Camille kissed her husband. The atmosphere had diffused. Stephen began to listen more calmly to his wife's task. About drilling holes, he began to place the second wall. It was smaller, but that didn't make it any easier. When Stephen drilled a hole, Camille's ears would pop and she would cover them with her hands. It was at this point that Stephen would make jokes at her and pretend as if he was yelling at her. She fell for his jokes a few times, but then she stopped. They had spent the entire day improving this room. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor of the room. At first, Camille tried to sweep it up, but it was not a good idea. Having finished the work, Stephen began to help sweep. His wife's help was needed, though she refused to help. Stephen divided up the duties. He swept the dust all over the floor and Camille wiped down the walls. When Stephen finished sweeping the floors, his wife kicked him out and began scrubbing the floors. At this time, Stephen began wiping down the picture frames. So many memories were held in those pictures. At that moment, he didn't know that a year and a half later, his picture with a black ribbon would be standing in the corner of the same room. But now he was happy that the work was almost finished. When his wife was scrubbing the floors, he helped her carry the bucket of water and brought the frames. Camille looked at her lover with tired eyes. She wanted to finish her work as soon as possible and lie down to rest. Between rest and her came these pictures. For the next couple of hours, sounds, swearing and bickering were heard from their room. They couldn't agree on how and in what order to hang them. Eventually, the photos were hung from left to right in chronological order. A few controversial photos hung in the same place. The couple couldn't remember exactly when the photos had been taken, but they didn't pay any attention to it. Camille was glad that her dream had come true. Together, they had made a room of memories that would be updated with new photos. She couldn't contain her emotions and ran into her husband's hot embrace. Stephen put his arms around her and kissed her. She looked like the little girl from the picture. Blonde hair, gathered in two pigtails, blue eyes shining with the will to give and adventure. She smiled and kissed her husband back. A couple days later, they picked up the children from their parents and brought them to this room. The children listened with interest to their dad and mom's stories and looked at the pictures. Remembering that day, tears flowed from her eyes. She could not live without him. The new day was like hard labor. Children often came to her, told her about their successes in life, what they were doing. But if they talked about their father, the family fell into silence. They loved him madly and grieved for his early departure forever. To his beloved, he would remain a little boy, wearing old clothes with abrasions on his arms and legs, who, despite adversity, always smiled and walked only forward. Camille would often come to this room and look at the pictures. She was able to forget that transgression of her husband that could have ruined everything and forever.
Subscribe and click the bell.
It was very cold and damp in the basement. Jack tried to warm himself with his hands, but it didn't help much. The floor was concrete, and from that icy he could no longer feel his feet. It was as if they had turned to stone. The poor man tried to cover them at least a little with his pathetic. There was about an hour left before he was released. The boy didn't have a watch, but he knew when the janitor Uncle David went to work. And now, by the sounds of it, he was shoveling snow outside. In an hour, he would go to the cook's house to ask for breakfast. Jack often stayed in this basement for his misbehavior. The caretaker would put him down here, even for the even candy in the cafeteria. He didn't like the boy. The one allowed himself too much, restricted in lessons, did not go to bed. When necessary, he stole leftover dinner food from the kitchen. This orphanage had the same rules as all the others. You behave well, you get praise and maybe a proper dinner. If you behave badly, you sit in the basement all day. The counselor always said you can beat the shit out of anybody. You just have to find a more subtle way. For him, that way was the cold cellar. He especially didn't want to be here in winter. After all, if in summer in the heat you were put in such a cool room, it's the grace of God. But in winter, one could die here not from boredom, as in summer, but from banal cold. Even the first floor is heated very poorly. Children walked around sick, as these constant draughts sold the room. Some fell seriously ill. A couple of times it even came to a fatal outcome. But if you're lucky like Jack, you're unlikely to die even in the worst place on this earth, like this stinking basement. Jack even developed his own method of maturation. Though of course, he peeked at this method in a book called Cold. Friction would do the trick. That's how limbs got started. Not a problem. Fall on them with warm air from your mouth. But if these methods don't work, just jump every now and then and wait for your punishment to end. What was Jack doing? The boy often withdrew into his thoughts, to help his body at least a little to distract himself from all sorts of problems. Hypothermia, heat, and even the pain of the shots. Jack disliked them very much. The doctor here did them horribly, harshly, and cruelly. So at times like this, he would just start dreaming. He's got a big 2-story house in the center of town. He is sipping his favorite hot coffee, sitting by the fireplace and reading a book. Next to him sits his faithful friend Domet and guards his master. Of course, all these dreams were not unfounded. When Jack became sad, he often took out his favorite book. And though he didn't have a fireplace or hot coffee, he did have a Domet, the yard dog that fate had brought him together with a year ago. Jack had escaped from the shelter again that day. He often did that when he got too bored or wanted to seek adventure in one place. And sometimes he just wanted freedom. Of course, this did not exempt him from responsibility, and he was still returned and very punished. Sometimes it even came to corporal punishment, but the boy lived the principle. It will happen not now, but later, and he ran away anyway. Last winter, in December, it was also cold. Jack waited for a moment when the tutor would leave for a couple of minutes and carefully went downstairs, where the windows opened, made a mess, might and slipped away. Of course, the hole in the fence had been made in advance and not even by him, but by past generations. But it was still used by the caretakers. It was often delayed. However, the boys here lived righteous, and many still managed to escape. Once free, he strode through the dark streets, keeping his hands in his pockets so they wouldn't freeze so quickly. His plan, as always, was as follows. He escapes, rummages through the garbage for food or anything of value, and comes back when he's cold, or he'd find a place to spend the night, and this time was no exception. However, he was very unlucky that day. All the garbage cans were empty, and if anything was found, it was only food wrappers. And so a desperate Jack wandered back to his cage, where he would be locked in the basement for at least a whole day. Suddenly, a puppy ran out onto the sidewalk. He was covered in some kind of sticky pink mixture and didn't care what was happening to his fur. The doggy looked very tired, though. He could barely move his legs. When Jack approached him, the puppy was very surprised and even lively. He looked at the passerby with interest, and the boy, in turn, examined the mongrels. That pink mishmash on his fur was like icing. It was very strange. However, when the kid turned his head to the left, he saw the word bakery. And near this building was a small courtyard where the garbage cans stood. That's where the dog's pink footprints led. Jack approached the dumpster and his hunch was confirmed. The confectioner didn't seem to like the icing, so he poured it right into the dumpster where the puppy had ended up. Stupid. With a smile, the boy asked the doggy, who was now following him. Jack examined the puppy and realized that in winter, the mutt would not find a place to wash. And he didn't seem to care much about it either. So the boy decided to take him with him. Yes, he did not nourish the hope that the educator would allow this creature to stay in the shelter. However, in this institution, the boy also had friends among the staff. One of them was Uncle David. Jack had known him all his life. He was in the orphanage all his conscious life, and this good man helped him in everything with lessons, often defended him from educators, and gave him useful life advice. Yes, Jack was a child to you. He always needed some kind of movement. That's why the staff really disliked him. He was too much trouble. But Uncle David saw something special in that boy. He was just a kid. He told the others, let him have his fun. Of course, that attitude made Jack realize who in this world to trust and who not to trust. Uncle David never left a boy in trouble, so he was very helpful that day as well. Uncle David whispered to the 13-year-old boy, "Help me, please." The man at that moment was also shoveling snow in the backyard of the orphanage. This year's snowfalls were endless, and these rubble piles had to be shoveled every single day when he turned around. There was surprise in his gaze. "Jack, what are you doing here? The counselor already put you down. Well, and you got you kid with the strictness. However, and with sympathy," said David. "Of course, a man." Yes, and all the staff of the orphanage are already used to the antics of this boy. But every time the boy went back, he caught Uncle Jack's disappointed look. Tom always felt very sorry for the boy. He had warned him many times about the consequences of such outings, but Jack never listened to him. Jack looked at the man with innocent childlike eyes. Then he stepped aside. Behind him was a puppy that sat meekly in the snow and even seemed to be smiling. "And who is this?" asked Uncle David, squatting down to study this little creature whose body was almost entirely in a pink gooey glaze. "The one that got it from the magical candy world." The man joked. "I found him by the bakery. Uncle David, he's all dirty. Please help me clean him up." The man stood up and gave the boy a stern look. "Do you see him now where I found him? Please, he's all sticky. Where will he find at least a horror? It's winter, he's very small." David continued to hold a stern look, but after a moment he gave in to Jack's pleas. He sighed heavily, but decided to help the poor thing. "Okay, I'll help your horrible friend, but promise me that he won't run away from the orphanage again." The boy thought briefly and nodded vigorously. Of course, he didn't even plan to fulfill his promise, and Uncle David guessed about it. "So this is where you are not a tolerable boy." The voice of the tutor came from behind. Jack looked fearfully at Uncle David, who also hid the puppy behind the shovel. Jack slowly turned around at the shrieks of his tormentor. The tutor abruptly grabbed the boy's arm and began to reprimand him. "And where have you been half the day has been? I hope you had a good walk, because now you won't leave the cellar for 2 days. Benjamin, it's my fault. I thought it would do him good to help me shovel snow. And I'm bad. My head didn't notice how the time flew by." Started making excuses for David. He and Jack looked at each other, and David continued, "Please don't punish him. It's my fault." The teacher looked at Jack menacingly. He didn't look dirty. His clothes were whole and clean. Usually the kid came in a complete tatters and always had to be given new pants and shirt. And now the mentor seemed to believe Uncle David. "What are you depriving yourself of dinner since you didn't ask for it?" Without taking his eyes off the boy, he began. "And you?" The man turned to David. "From now on, keep track of the time and warn me. Otherwise, you will have to talk to the principal." "I understand, Benjamin." Uncle David obediently replied. The teacher looked questioningly at Jack, as if he expected him to say something. "I hear you, Benjamin," Jack repeated, winking at David. "Outrageous." The teacher was indignant and led the boy into the building. David was left alone. Behind him, the puppy sat quietly behind the shovel. "But a fluffy donut with glaze. Let's go swimming," said the man, took the dog in his arms and carried it in his hand. "How's the donut?" asked Jack, entering the janitor's modest room the next day. It was on the first floor, and the entrance was from the backyard. Although the room was small, it fit a lot of things. 1 bedroom, a bed, an old desk, and even a TV and refrigerator. Very often the room reminded him of Harry Potter's den, where he had lived until his 12th birthday. Jack often joked that Uncle David was the grown-up Harry Potter. And he replied that he looked more like X, yes, because he was quite large in build. But there was one thing that made the man different from Harry. He had his own bathroom, a room. It was a shower stall a few centimeters from the front door. Uncle David was sitting on the bed with him next to him. Satisfied, fed, and clean-eared Buddy. Donut asked the janitor in surprise. Well, yes, his name is Donut now. Or do you know anyone else who could have gotten just as ridiculously stuck in the baking icing bin? Uncle David grinned and motioned for the boy to sit next to him. He nodded affirmatively and ate up the tension by the bed. The puppy immediately ran over to the boy's lap and curled up. Uncle David, what will happen now? Jack said sadly, What do you mean? From the donuts? He won't be allowed to live with us. You won't be allowed. David said seriously, They don't care about me. The boy's eyes lit up with joy. He turned to the man and hugged him. Uncle David, are you the best? Whispered the happy child. The janitor patted him on the back. You realize what you have now done for this poor boy? A real gift. A terrible and sad memory of his little daughter, who died of cancer a few years ago, immediately came over him. David came home one day with a puppy. It was his daughter's birthday, and she was excited about the gift, just as Jack was now. That was probably why Uncle David had grown so fond of the little boy. He was just as fidgety and just like his Lisa. I'm David, it's okay, Jack asked, noticing the obviously sad expression on his older friend's face. And I'm just awfully glad you found a new friend. And now, sitting in the basement, the boy remembered it all with a smile. Last year at Christmas, everyone had candy and new stationery. And only Jack had a donut that no one knew about. He spent all his free time with it every morning, and every evening he would go off to Uncle Jack's den and play with his new horrible friend there. There was the sound of the lock opening to the basement doors. Come out, the stern voice of the tutor sounded. The boy got up from the cold floor and walked to the stairs. What are you staring at? Come up, I'll show you where to clean. The tutor commanded. Jack could barely move his legs. They were like convicts. Fixing a cellar confinement wasn't the only punishment. After that, half the orphanage had to be scrubbed to a mirror shine. As soon as the boy came out of the cellar, they gave him a mop and a red bucket. Today, in my opinion, the first, second floor, and do not forget about the dust, announced the tutor. But Benjamin, I just went to bed 2 hours later than I should. Why am I being punished so cruelly? I'm terribly tired. My legs were mending at Jack's school like a little puppy. But he was rudely interrupted. So cruelly grinned the mentor. You are not deprived of reading books, TV, and other entertainment. You're just being asked to clean up. Or do you want more responsibilities? Tired. And you weren't tired yesterday. No, sorry, the boy lowered his head in embarrassment. Benjamin patted him on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Jack alone in the huge hallway. This orphanage wasn't much different from the others. But there were some important differences. The electricity here was often turned off to save money. The food was of very questionable quality, and the staff was not known for their friendliness. And while many other orphanages had Christmas parties and gifts from charitable foundations, and for some reason, their institutions were bypassed. The rich donors didn't like the owner of the institution. They just called her a viper. And indeed, her terrible character was associated exactly with this creeping creature. And she herself was skinny, as simple, all the time angry and irritated on employees and subordinates, and talked to everyone as if personally to her every interlocutor for life owed. No wonder that all charitable companies shunned her. Once she literally threw out one of the volunteers, because to organize holidays for children required huge expenses, in her opinion. Of course, this was followed by lawsuits and administrative investigations. But the case was quickly hushed up. According to rumors, the principal just knew who and when to give a paw, and everywhere had her interceptions. Called this snake, and such a Principal Catherine. Of course, she was also cruel to children. And this woman certainly did not like children, and as soon as possible would like to get rid of them. Once a couple adopted a boy from their orphanage, but after a month they gave him back, citing that he was a very naughty and capricious child. It turned out that throughout that month, the poor boy was bullied, starved, beaten, and humiliated in every possible way. And now even life in this orphanage seemed like a fairy tale to him. Compared to life at his new mom and dad's, the principal gritted her teeth and took the child back. For her, it was another extra year, extra costs and expenses, nothing more. What about herself? She was not poor, earning her loot, stealing from poor orphans. Jack had skipped breakfast, however had washed all the plates and tables. The entire dining room was clean, so was the entire first floor. Now that left the second, which Uncle David had volunteered to help him with. It's all cleaned up. Now run throw out the trash and run to lunch, the man ordered glumly. Jack nodded and was about to run to fulfill the request. However, the uncle stopped and turned around. "Are you all right?" asked the boy. "Yes, everything is fine." "Let's get to work." The boy was a little more cheerful, replied David. Jack didn't insist, but David was clearly in trouble. He was rarely this depressed. But today he was sluggish, which didn't please the boy, already closing the trash can. Jack saw a girl walking behind the fence. She was carrying in her hand some kind of box in red beautiful wrappings. It immediately caught his eye, as Jack was very fond of the color red. He went closer to the fence and called the girl. She approached the boy with disbelief. "What's that in your box?" Jack asked. "I bought a present for my mom for Christmas," proudly answered the girl, and the boy made a detached sound. "So, will you give it to her? Is it a secret?" The stranger giggled. Jack smiled at her, and she walked on. And suddenly he felt so sad and empty. After all, he had no father or mother. He never received gifts and never gave them to anyone. Jack had never felt such a pleasant emotion in his life when someone gives you something. The only really nice gift in his life was when Uncle David decided to take care of the donuts. And that's when he realized that David was the most precious person to him. The one who replaced both his father and a kind grandfather and a good teacher. All the best qualities of a good family man were gathered in this man. It's a pity he didn't have a family. His wife died immediately after childbirth, and his daughter died of cancer a few years later. For the rest of his life, he lived in that little room, helped the orphanage, and got along very well with the children. But of course, the most special child to him remained Jack. They met when the kid was only 7 years old. It was raining that day, and the kids brought a lot of mud from the street. Little Jack was sent to get the janitor to clean the floors. But it was David's day off that day, so he was resting in his room and reading a book. Jack knocked timidly on the door. "Who else has come?" A menacing, disgruntled voice answered. The boy was even frightened. He was shy and always fearful of adults, but he still had to go in the damn thing. Otherwise, he would be scolded severely for not running an errand. "I'm sorry," quipped Jack quietly. "Not sorry," detachedly muttered the janitor. "I was told you needed to be called in to clean up. It's my day off today, I won't be doing anything." "You tell your tutor that." "But I was really asked." "I don't care if you were asked. I don't get paid for this. Now get out of here." The man shouted at the boy and slammed the door with force. The boy stood there with his nose pressed against the closed, shabby door. Fear appeared in his eyes. What would the tutor say to him? But it's not his problem, right? It's the janitor's job, not his. It's not his fault. But as it turns out, that's not the law in this orphanage. What? What did he say to you? Arrogantly questioned Jack Mentor that it was his day off, and you should have just told him I ordered it. Why do I have to do everything myself? You were asked to simply relay the order. What's so hard about that? The man exploded. But he said that means now you go and clean up all the cold dirt. Got it, shouted the tutor and then grabbed the boy's arm. The boy was about to cry, but what was his fault? Let the boy go. Suddenly, a rough male voice was heard from behind. Jack turned around and saw the janitor. "Oh, here comes the liberator," the caretaker remarked sarcastically. "Don't touch the boy, he's not guilty of anything." "I'll clean it up now," David said sternly. Benjamin looked haughtily at the boy and at the janitor, then silently turned and left. David walked over to the boy and squatted down so that he was the same height as him. "I'm sorry, kid. I didn't think you'd be persecuted like that because of me." The boy nodded silently. He didn't know what to say in such situations. A thank you would sound strange and inappropriate. Since you don't want to help out around here, I can buy you ice cream later. Jack's eyes lit up with joy. He very rarely had ice cream. It was only for special occasions. The caretakers at this orphanage gave such a treat. Unless it was Christmas, birthdays, and the orphanage never celebrated these kids at all. You're all like stray dogs, and stray dogs don't have birthdays, said the caretakers contemptuously. Anyway, Jack never got ice cream for nothing, so he instantly accepted the janitor's offer. Thus was born their strong male friendship, which has lasted until now. Once Uncle David helped Jack out, and sometimes the boy helped his older comrade. As he returned to the orphanage, he heard the signal for dinner. The dining room was quite large, for it was home to about 300 children of various ages. Jack, as usual, sat down next to Maria, his new friend. Her parents had died in a car accident a year ago, and now she lived here. The children were in the same group under the same teacher. The kids hit it off right away and became pretty good friends. Maria was a year younger than Jack, but she was very smart, which the boy liked. She was fond of books and spent almost every free minute in the library. This girl was a real Hermione Granger among the residents of the orphanage. Jack, on the other hand, felt like Ron Weasley. He often asked his friend for advice, to which she either sent him away for his stupid ideas or helped him when she thought it was worthwhile. Maria wasn't a nerd and was always up for different adventures, unless, of course, they entailed the possibility of punishment. She smells awful. Jack mooed, poking at the fish with his fork. It's just fish. Eat it, and don't complain. You missed breakfast today anyway, and last night dinner was sitting in your favorite basement. Blaming him. Maybe I was bored. I didn't have anyone to talk to. Well, I'm sorry our kindergarten teacher didn't like me. Is the boy resentful? No, he's doing the right thing. It's your fault for not following the rules that are written for everyone. You went to bed at 12 instead of 9. That's a crime. If you don't think families have rules like that, you're wrong. Kids have to go to bed pretty early, and it affects their physical and psycho-emotional state. And a cold basement where the batteries don't work has no effect. That's the punishment you deserve. What a bore you are, Maria, sighed Jack, rolling her eyes. The girl looked at him with a suspicious squint in her eyes. Jack noticed this stare and said with some surprise, "Why are you looking like that?" "You were going to tell me something before lunch. Tell me you decided to snow Benjamin's room." The boy raised his eyebrows and exclaimed indignantly, "What? How could you even think such a thing? With your imagination, you can only write books. That's what I read them for," foolishly replied Maria. "So, yes, I've been cleaning. Uncle Jack helped today. I've noticed he's been a little off lately." The girl leaned into the boy's ear. "What do you mean?" "Something's happened to him. I can't figure out what it is. We should go see him today to find out what happened. And I had another thought while I was cleaning up." "Well, tell me, I'm sick of procrastinating. I want to give Uncle David a Christmas present." The girl sent her eyebrows rising up in surprise. "What?" she exclaimed, and realizing that it was very loud, immediately covered her mouth with her hand. Maria became uncomfortable with such attention. At this shout, Benjamin came up to them. The boy looked at his friend with condemnation. She only smiled embarrassedly. "Why are you shouting?" The educator began to swear. "I'm sorry. Found out that my favorite character in the book dies at the end. I didn't see that coming. I mean, he was the best." Maria got out of it. Boris gave her a stern look and left silently. "What kind of hero?" sneezed boy. When the tutor moved a decent distance away, Maria rolled her eyes and with feigned arrogance said, "Interesting. But you don't care about books anyway." "Perhaps," mumbled Jack. After some silence, the girl first broke the silence. "So you want to give something to some Uncle David, but not to me." Indignantly, but with a smile, Maria rambled on. "That's exactly what the boy snorted. And seriously, what should I get him?" "Do you have a choice? It's like being given 1 million pocket money a month." Jack thought about it. Where would he get a present if he had no money at all? Doing it himself isn't an option. It always looks lame. Doing something with his own hands is obviously not his way of earning money. How? Because you're only allowed to work from the age of 16. His face was studying you, and he lowered his head. Hey, what are you worried about, girlfriend? But Jack didn't answer. They started to be kicked out of the cafeteria as lunchtime was up. Now the kids had to get dressed and go outside. After eating, they were all going for a walk with the caretaker. So without finishing their conversation, the friends scattered to their locker rooms, quickly getting ready for their walk. So what do you think? Jack asked suddenly when he finally got close to Maria and paired up with her. They were walking along the usual route. Their path took them across the road. Then they turned left where there was a large park. The children needed fresh air, their kind principal said. The teacher, of course, didn't like the idea of walking these good serfs for an hour every day, no matter what the weather was like. What are you talking about? The girl asked in bewilderment. How can I earn money for a present? Have you decided what you want to give? Uncle David has long dreamed of a new winter coat. His old one is already covered in cardboard. There are holes everywhere, and it doesn't keep warm anymore. Anyway, I don't want him to get sick. A coat like this costs around $200. More or less good, Maria said thoughtfully. $200. Jack whispered in his mind, figuring out how to earn that amount. I don't think you can get that much money in a month. Disappointedly stretched the girl. The boy was silent. His friend was right. It's true. Even with such a great desire, he could not get a job and earn such a sum. The main thing that hindered him was his age. He was not yet 16 and officially could only get a job from that age, and the orphanage did not allow the pupils to work on the side. Jack couldn't think of any other way to get money, and he was very sad about it. He wanted very much to make a present to Uncle David. The man had done a lot for him, and he wanted to return the favor. And it was on this walk that Jack got this crazy idea. Are you crazy? Maria exclaimed. The boys were sitting in the library after lunch because it was pouring rain outside, and they hadn't been taken for a walk in the park today. I know it sounds crazy and even scary, but it's worth it, Jack reassured her. According to you, every time you escape from the orphanage to start working as a courier to drug houses. That's a good idea. But I didn't say it was a good idea. But why not give it a shot? I still have a year of patience to try to get a job. This way, I'll just start working early and unofficially. Jack, this is reckless. Hear me out. You think you're going to get away with this? You'll work as a courier for a while, but someday you'll be exposed and you won't be able to be away so much as to give Uncle David a present. How do you envision that happening? Actually, if they put you in the basement for going to bed 2 hours late, what are they going to do if you go missing every single day for a month? The girl said restlessly. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? I've already made up my mind. I'll avoid the quiet hour. He got a job as a courier under the earnings, and by the holidays I will be able to buy Uncle David a real nice gift. Yeah, I'm prepared to be punished. A lot of punishment. I'm sure I'll get a record and a nasty character reference. But I really want to give the Dan gift. You know what I mean? He deserves it for all the years he's worked here, for what he's been through, and I'm willing to do anything. Are you really crazy? I'm upset. Where? Tell me you find your employers. That behind every bush, there is a drug dealer ready to take the orphanage as a drug mule. Jack gave Maria a mocking look. What are you? Or do you think I'm crazy? That's exactly what I think, she said. I've already been given an address by a high school student for a percentage of future sales. My God, is this some kind of mafia drug trafficking ring? Maybe. Well, then you're gonna help keep it going. The girl looked at him incredulously. She didn't want to let her only friend go on such a dangerous adventure, and she couldn't risk it herself. It would lead to huge problems. Unlike Jack, she was totally unprepared for them. But his eyes were so bright when he talked about his stunning plan. Jack really wanted to make his Uncle David happy. So Maria nodded affirmatively, even though it was a hard choice to make. She was worried about Jack. Anything could have happened to him this month, up to and including murder. A lonely teenage orphan in a big, dangerous city. It didn't occur to her that Jack could do such a thing. It was really dangerous and very dangerous indeed. Then meet here tonight after dinner and discuss the plan going forward, said Jack as if he had no choice. but let's stop by Uncle David's first. I want to make sure he's okay." The girl nodded silently again. She was both scared and anxious, but she wanted to help her friend. In the evening, as agreed, they met at the library. From there, the boys headed to David's. They knocked on the door, the den. There was no answer, and then Jack looked over at Maria. Decided to open the door unceremoniously. Uncle David was lying on the bed with his arms around his head. He looked utterly despondent and completely disillusioned with his life. "Uncle David, what happened?" Maria asked excitedly, approaching the man. He took his hands off his head and looked at the children sorrowfully. Jack had never seen David cry before. The boy doubted that this strong man could cry at all and could be so unhappy. But suddenly something alarmed Jack. He did not hear the native dog barking. Nowhere was the shaggy doggy who greeted him every time with an enthusiastic bark. Uncle David held out Jack. "Where's the donut?" David gave another sobbing kick, and that's when Jack realized everything from the donut. Was something wrong? The boy walked over to the janitor and asked again, already more agitated, "Where's my dog?" "Jack, this is so awful. I'm such a fool. Please, forgive me, Vanya. Make a deal." "What happened?" shouted the boy, is already out of control, and he was taken by Jack. "They decided that dogs don't belong here. They came and took him while I was out. I came back here. He was gone. As I was looking, I wondered how he managed to open the door. Maybe I didn't close it tight enough. Then Benjamin himself came in. He said he'd handed over the Viper's dog." And the stale-looking man cried again. Maria immediately began to soothe him. And Jack didn't hesitate a moment longer. He ran straight to the principal's office. He didn't care that it was late. All he cared about now was the long-eared, innocent creature he had taken into his care and let down. Jack was experiencing such a variety of feelings: anger, frustration, hurt, despair, God alone. It was known what the principal could do to the little defenseless one. Just the thought of what could happen to him made the boy's hair stand up on his head. "Where is my dog?" Bursting into the principal's office, Jack shouted in a voice that was not his own. And Kate sat in her chair, turned to the window. She was watching the sunset. As soon as the boy burst into her office, she slowly turned around. Jack was annoyed by her nonchalant, stony expression. "Where's my dog?" In a voice trembling with anger, the boy asked. You mean that vile mongrel, which inexplicably, as it turned out to our staff janitor," sarcastically asked the principal, who liked the utmost precision in everything. "It's not a mongrel," and baptized Jack. "This is my friend, and once again." In an icy tone said the Viper, small brown dog with crooked legs, who lived in the gatehouse of the janitor and gave him to the right place. Where did you give him to?" snapped the boy out of his seat. Suddenly, a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. Jack turned around and saw the tutor. He turned him around, grabbed his arm, and led him out of the classroom. Jack screamed and kicked, trying to get out of the dead grip, but all was unsuccessful. "Why are you yelling?" Finally, Benjamin couldn't stand it. "Your dog had been taken to a shelter. You knew perfectly well that we couldn't have animals. At first, we thought it was the janitor's dog. But now that you've broken into the principal office, it's clear. What kind of a fool are you? Bring him back. You have no right." And the boy with his screams, "You're not helping the cause." "My dear, tomorrow you'll get the punishment you deserve. Now you're going to bed." Night fell at 9 o'clock. All the children had to lie in their beds. Maria and Jack were no exception. They were also pushed in their beds. But as soon as the caretaker left, the planned play began. Jack quietly got out of bed, picked up his backpack that was behind his pillow. He often ran away from the orphanage, so he already had a backpack prepared for such an occasion. It contained all the essentials. He tiptoed down the hall to the next room where the girls slept. When he reached the door, he quietly knocked 3 times at the agreed time. Maria, of course, was also awake. As soon as she heard the conditional signal, quickly got out of bed and slipped out into the corridor. Carefully looking around the sides of the children in short sprints, reached the main recreation leading to the stairs. They peeked out from behind the door and peered down the empty hallway. There was no one on the first floor. The way was clear. Let's run," Maria whispered. The children went down the stairs. Both bent the hallway and almost got caught by the tutor, who had already gone into his room. Now all they had to do was divert the guards' attention. They stopped, breathing heavily. They looked at each other and realized it was time to say goodbye. "I hope you'll come back someday, Vanya. I will miss you very much," quietly said the girl. A tear rolled down her cheek. But Jack did not notice it, as it was quite dark. "I'll be back," confidently replied the boy. "See you later, I promise. We will see you again." With these words he, as it was intended, hid behind a column in the semi-darkness and faintly lit night of the hall. Almost nothing could be seen. The principal had saved every light bulb to cut down and buy things necessary for the orphanage. Maria went straight to the guard post. This night there was an obese old man Robert on duty. "What are you doing here?" he said threateningly when he saw a thin, girlish figure in the semi-darkness. Maria, following the plan, tried to pretend to be sleepwalking, but she was very bad at it, to put it mildly. She just walked with her arms stretched forward like a zombie. After all, that's how they showed it in the movies. But Jack didn't pay any attention to that. And while the guard came out from behind his counter to deal with Maria wandering in the night, he slipped past, bent over, pushed open the heavy door, the electronic lock that hadn't worked in a month. Praise the stingy viper. He finally got free by jumping through a hole in the fence. He quickly made his way out of the orphanage. "Okay, I'll ask you again, what are you doing here?" the guard asked Maria threateningly. But she did not get out of character. She still didn't make any sense. Walked, stretching her arms forward and half, covering her eyes. "Sakharova," suddenly sounded a heavy voice from behind. In this voice, the girl immediately recognized Benjamin. She woke up immediately and turned around, shaking with terror. "Why aren't you in bed?" suspiciously asked the tutor. The girl looked at her tutor in horror. She didn't know what she should do now. She had been exposed, which meant Jack would be exposed now. She only hoped that he had already escaped. "I started Maria, even though I had no idea what to say. But the tutor did it for her. He grabbed the girl's hands and pulled her behind him. You'll spend tonight in the SSU, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do with you." Formidable, announced Benjamin, tossing the poor girl into the damp, cold cellar. "From who? From whom? But I never expected this from you." "Maria." The girl didn't even look at him. She knew no amount of apologizing would help. She'd have to sit here all night. Maria hoped it wasn't all for nothing at least. Jack woke up on a large trash bag. On the maintenance floor of some open entryway, he had stumbled upon a few blocks from the orphanage. It was about 700 and the winter sun was just showing over the horizon. As he stepped out of the entryway and looked around the area he had found himself in last night, the teenager realized he was almost outside the city. Behind the rows of high-rise buildings were already visible impressive private houses. Between these neighborhoods stretched a huge vacant lot where the townspeople who lived nearby walked their children and dogs. There was a frozen pond on which a spontaneous skating rink was organized, and the natural height differences allowed to organize long snow slides. On weekends, fun was boiling here, and both kids and adults were skating on snow pens and sleds. Heating the area, Jack began to think about where he could go to get something to eat. In his pocket was the measly $20 Maria had given him. "Will you need this more?" He remembered her words. Sighing, he smiled all over his spring face and headed wherever his eyes were. Choosing high-rise neighborhoods, he rightly reasoned that there would be more infrastructure here than enclosed cottage settlements. Suddenly, a horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes in the archway that led to the courtyard of the big house. Some hooligans had pinned the poor girl against the wall. Jack didn't hesitate to come closer. "Give me the money, you cunt," shouted the rough voices. "I already told you I have nothing," answered the poor girl, crying. "Only the phone, I swear. There's nothing else. Let me go." Jack couldn't stand it any longer and stepped out of the shadows. "Get away from her," he ordered in as gruff a tone as possible. The boys turned around. There was a smirk on their faces. One of them had a huge black eye. The other was clutching a knife. It looked pretty intimidating. "Oh, And this is not like your boyfriend," grinned one of the big guys, turning to the girl. She was silent with sobs and howls and looked questioningly at Jack. There was genuine consternation in her gaze. "I repeat, get away from her. Or will you be sick?" Jack blurted out, even though he knew there was nothing he could do. He'd never played sports. And of course, he wasn't a jock either. The guys took offense, staggered out of such insolence, and began to slowly circle like wolves approaching him. Jack involuntarily began to retreat backward, and here he ran into a blank wall. There was nowhere to retreat further. Now he too felt like that unfortunate girl. His body was numb with fear or something. I asked one of the guys mockingly. And at that moment, whether from fright or from the courage that suddenly seized him, Jack kicked his foot in a heavy boot right between the big guy's legs. He rolled off the ground and screamed in pain. "Why are you getting the wrong side of the tracks?" the other man shouted. Jack ran a couple of meters along the wall, but the guy caught up with him and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. "Run!" shouted Jack to the girl, who was watching the scene as if in a trance. Then he got a very strong blow on his face, as if he was paralyzed, and he collapsed on the floor. Jack struggled to get up, but eventually passed out. Maria stood in the principal office and waited. She didn't know what was about to happen to her. Early in the morning, she had been dragged out of the basement where she had brought here by her limbs. Not yet completely recovered from the terrible cold. She understood Jack very well now. Now the girl was trying to think of an excuse for everything that had happened yesterday. She didn't think they would be exposed so quickly. She hadn't been prepared for Jack to run away at all, and she was all the more certain that she wouldn't be blamed for it. After all, Jack had often escaped from the shelter, and she had never been touched, and she had nothing to do with the dog. But now she felt guilty of every mortal sin. Her teeth chattered against her eyes, tears welling up. "Sit down," Kate ordered, entering the office. The girl as a robot complied with the instructions on her stony face. No feelings and emotions were reflected. All the experiences were happening inside. The principal sat down in her leather chair and took out some documents and said, "Maria, according to the information I received, you were walking around the orphanage yesterday after lights out. How do you explain your actions?" I started, Maria, at the same time thinking of something to justify myself. "I'm sleepwalking." "Yes, that's what our guard told me. However, you woke up immediately. As soon as Benjamin saw you. I don't have to make excuses, we all know that. You helped your friend Jack escape, and I'm right." Maria even caught her breath. They understood. She started to feel nauseous. She'd never been in this kind of trouble before. Jack might be used to it, but she had always been an obedient and intelligent girl, and she couldn't believe that all this was really happening to her. "Yes," said Maria in a fallen voice. There was silence in the office. Kate seemed to ponder the situation for ages and finally decided to ask where he was going. "I don't know," lied the girl. "Then maybe you know why he decided to run away at night. It's obvious. He's got a little spirit." Maria saddled up on her favorite horse. "The explanation is that everyone sleeps at night, and he was only discovered missing in the morning. And they didn't think that after what happened last night he wouldn't run away. That's ridiculous. He's always been very emotional. And if you had at least tried to calm him down, it probably wouldn't have happened." "Wow," the Viper marveled at the audacity of that. "Well, in response to your amazing monologue, I am happy to inform you that you and your friend are in big trouble with irony and some incomprehensible to normal people pride," said the principal. Maria's heart sank into her heels. What have I done? With despair, she thought. Jack woke up terribly, and with pain in his head, he barely opened his eyes and realized that it was already dark. After regaining consciousness a little, he stirred and looked for his backpack. Naturally, it wasn't there. He didn't have to think long. These two guys had his stuff, and there was some money and some clothes. Some food, a penknife the boy treasured. It was all gone in an instant. The boy felt like a helpless puppy in this big city. He got up from his slumber. He tried to wipe the blood from his face with his hand and went wherever he could, wandered through the streets dedicated to bright electric lights. Now the idea of running away seemed to him a complete delusion. He was too young for all this, and he shouldn't have left. And to return now was shameful and pointless. No, he's already made his choice. He would find donuts and a job. Jack desperately hoped Maria would be okay. But right now, his main concern was his missing backpack. For now, he had nothing. And he was getting hungrier by the minute. Jack wandered onward, unable to see where he was going. It took about an hour. When the pain in his stomach became unbearable, he found himself at the fence of a posh cottage community. It was so beautiful here. Well-groomed paths, smart Christmas trees shimmering and themselves running lights, flaunted in the center of a large round space cleared of snow. At the very entrance gate, of course, stood a powerful barrier and sat in a booth guard, strictly looking around, all those passing into the territory accountable to him. Jack sighed. He is absolutely no use to anyone here in the dwelling of the rich. He is just an abandoned by all and an orphan stranger at this feast of life. But that was not the nature of our hero to feel sorry for himself for long. Smiling, the boy turned left from the main entrance and on the light made nonchalantly her face say, well, and did not really want to, and went to himself in a sprawl. After 50 meters, having made sure that from here the guard could no longer see him from behind the lush, evenly trimmed coniferous hedges framing the high fence, Jack let loose with all his legs along the perimeter. He knew perfectly well that every fortress, even the most impregnable one, was bound to have a weak spot. And so it was. On the back side of the huge rectangle that was the settlement, he saw a chain of dog tracks, pulling them right under the thorny branches. Aha! Jack rejoiced and bent down into the fragrant business thickets. Of course, you had one iron bar here, rotten from time, and somebody kicked it out. So there was such a hole in the very time to get through a dog or another evil teenager to find himself on the other side. Jack was in no hurry to get out of his key hiding place. He looked around first, scouting the surroundings. The house directly across the street glowed with the bright orange lights of the big windows. A large dog rattled its chain in the yard. The owners clearly lived here all the time. The next ones to his right also showed signs of frequent human presence. And on the other side, also advancing under cover of the hedge, the boy scrutinized the houses opposite. At last one of them seemed to him suitable, though the main driveway and cleared. But at the door and attacked piles of frozen snow, all the windows are dark. Only in the gatehouse at the gate light is on. It means they are clearing the passage for the seldom coming owners. And the door is used very rarely. That's right. It is much easier for the guard to press the button on the remote control to go outside the perimeter if necessary than to clean the snow at the door. If the rich gentlemen were here all the time, they wouldn't let this happen. Having made such conclusions, Jack resolutely moved forward, but of course he did not go straight ahead. He went around back and also looked for a weak spot in the fence. And here it was found, but another one on the brickwork, the support post. He climbed the fence to decorate the blinds. We are such and easy to slide down the snowy steepness. Of course, the snow from the yard, no one takes out a dump truck with mushrooms to the fence, and all matters in the spring itself will melt. Fortunately, this line of houses was the last in the settlement at the very forest. Such plots are always sold more expensive. Everyone likes to live a secluded life, but the only thing that the owners of such houses on the outskirts do not take into account that they will have to spend much more on security. After all, to penetrate the house, unprotected, on the one hand, the presence of neighbors is very easy. Usually everyone saves on this, and for nothing. When he is in the bathtub rich and will buy himself such a beautiful house, the first thing to plant not 1-2 guards, front and back, and more cameras. Thinking in this way, the boy cautiously walked around the rich mansion, trying to find some crevice to get inside. He was lucky here too. Not counting on success, he pulled the door of the back door, which is usually used by servants, and it easily yielded to the boy, smelled the cozy warmth of a living, well-arranged room. And he did not hesitate long once, and already inside quiet as a mouse. He stood against the wall near the door and listened. There was silence all around. Not a single sound betraying the presence of people. Jack slowly moved forward. He had been in houses like this several times during his escapes. He had broken into other people's dwellings in various ways and knew roughly how things must be organized. Every time, it should be noted, he got away with it. I guess he was born under a lucky star, the cheeky boy thought contentedly. But he had never seen such a luxurious house. As he walked through the corridors and hallways, he looked around in utter delight. Marble floors, oak paneling, massive doors and windows, lights, curtains like in a movie about royal life, huge faces, evening furniture, paintings on the walls. Jack realized that he had entered the dwelling of very wealthy people. The boy wanted to find a place to eat and sleep, but there was no place to sleep. There is nowhere to sleep in such luxury. Even on the floor, the carpets are so clean and fluffy that it seems that one stepped on them and immediately spoiled them. Besides, one could not discount the possibility that the rich tenants could return at any moment. After all, the New Year's holidays were coming up, and the place didn't look abandoned at all. Not even the smallest thing was covered in dust. It proved that the house was well looked after. The 3-story huge house required such a constant investment in its maintenance that the mother would not grieve. On the first floor were various household rooms, from where Jack penetrated into the front rooms. Then a giant hallway lined with marble mosaics. A huge living room with a fireplace, some other rooms, kitchens, a master suite with a bar, more like a mausoleum. Here Jack found some food items. It was mostly well-packaged or canned food, juices. And there was isolated water, all of which could not have pleased the hungry boy, and he ate well and took enough with him in a bag found here in one of the drawers. On the second floor were the bedrooms of many, many bedrooms. Too many, in fact, and of course Jack entered a couple of them. He didn't hesitate to take a warm blanket from some bed. How many of them is there? He was in for another cold night, maybe more than one. He didn't touch anything of value. He knew perfectly well that the loss of canned food and plate would not upset anyone. But if he reported gold, expensive appliances or silverware, or any other valuable trinkets, then he will definitely be found. The police do their best for such rich people. When he was about to leave, he saw the nightstand, which had not been closed all the way, and in it an elegant jewelry box. When he opened it fully, he gasped. There was a great array of beautiful jewelry. A real treasure trove, the glitter of precious stones, mesmerized the teenager, and he, nevertheless, breaking his own rules, decided to take everything. He thought that if such treasures are lying around, then their owners will not be particularly upset if not missing some little thing, say these seriosha. This is a ring with a red stone. But this bracelet is also probably worth a lot of money. The boy took everything he liked in jewelry to sell them to some fence and get good money for them. At least that's what he thought and hoped, suppressing his remorse and carefully closing the bedroom door behind him. Jack headed for the exit and was already down the wide staircase back to the hall. But suddenly his attention was drawn to a painting hanging directly opposite a huge mirror in a gilded frame. It depicted a man in his 40s. He was sitting in a wheelchair. His facial features were very well drawn, and suddenly this image reminded Jack something very well. Familiar had curls, dimples on her cheeks, a straight nose, freckles, and most importantly, eyes. They were different colors. One was Arius, the other green man. Jack couldn't help himself from loud astonishment, and even whistled in amazement like fire. He took in the strange portrait. For from the canvas his own face was looking at him, only more grown up. Jack, too, had eyes of different colors. Once in words, the left-handed doctor at the inspection had explained to him that such a defect, as he put it, was called temerity. It is a congenital peculiarity, he said. Then it very often accompanies various congenital genetic diseases. No wonder your parents rejected you. Who would want a freak like that? Little Jack then did not understand everything, but very offended that he was called a freak, and cried in his crib at night for a long time. And now, when he saw the image of a man just like himself in that rich house right in front of him, he remembered everything. The boy looked at himself for a long time in the mirror, hanging opposite the picture, twisting this way and that, trying to take the same angle. It appeared that the man was indeed his exact copy, or rather Jack was a copy of the stranger, Hearing the sudden sharp sound of crashing glass, the boy froze in shock as he made an awkward move in front of the mirror and broke the vase next to it. Jack did not even have time to react. He was immediately seized with a terrible fear. But most of all, he was frightened by quick footsteps, which were heard somewhere on the first floor from the side of the service rooms. The boy immediately picked up a bag of groceries, gathered all the things he had grabbed, and started to run. "Hold it!" A voice came from behind him. Jack did not turn around. He ran down the back stairs, reached the door through which he had snuck here, and tried to open it. Nothing worked, however. It was now locked. Jack held it a few more times and realized that nothing would work. The kid started looking for other ways to escape, and the footsteps were getting closer. "Stand still!" A man yelled behind him. He was about to catch up with the boy, but he jumped onto the wide windowsill, smashed the window with his shoulder, and jumped out of the building. The alarm in the house was so loud that the whole village seemed to hear it. The man ran to his booth to turn that awful one off, tired of the left-handed sound that was clearly disturbing all the neighbors. Meanwhile, Jack carried everything he could away from the place. He wanted to get away as fast as he could. After all, he'd seen movies where the police were on their way to pick up a criminal within minutes. After about 15 minutes, he was exhausted. Jack realized he had stopped right at some half-abandoned bridge over a frozen river. Nearby was a huge tank, which was intended for burning various country garbage. Jack took matches out of his pocket, and all in the same house, and tried to set fire to the contents of the tank. There were trash scraps, split boards, cut branches. Surprisingly, he succeeded. He spread the stolen slabs on the ground, felt the jewelry in his pocket with his hand, and opened a can of canned fish. This night promised to be a long one, and he really hoped the police weren't looking for him. How wrong was Jack? "When did you notice he was missing?" questioned Kate, the policeman, in the morning, when they were missing one child. "He had run away before, but came back in a few hours," answered the principal, pretending to be very upset. All this action took place in the hall of the first floor. This was seen by Maria, who is now everyday orphanage. The girl was very angry. There is no sympathy and sympathy in this woman. Maria still did not understand what was the plan of the Viper, why she is sitting here with this policeman, and not in her office, as usual, and winding snot on her fist, pretending to be a slender mother. She called the police for a reason. She doesn't care about the kids, probably pursuing another goal more selfishly. But Maria couldn't yet figure out which one. Waking up the next day, Jack was happy to find himself in the same place where yesterday he fell asleep with his back to the warm and conditionally stove after the burning of garbage Baku. The police didn't find him, or maybe they weren't looking for him, but still the orphanage had to report him missing. So it's going to be harder to find the laborer now. Of course, the whole drug trafficking fable was a complete lie, just to fake it in front of Maria. "Excuse me, do you need a waiter?" asked the boy to the administrator of the 10th or 15th cafe. The girl looked at him with an evaluating look, and then a wide smile appeared on her face. "Hello, my savior," she said to him. "Now, as I see, you are in need." Jack looked at her in surprise. And then he realized. Why did she seem vaguely familiar? "You managed to get away from them after all." "I'm glad." He smiled broadly, and he smiled back at her. "As you can see, I'm alive and well too. But I really need a job. I can work for half pay," he added, quickly fearing that he would be turned down. "Wait here," she said. "We'll figure something out." And she went into the back rooms. Jack really hoped she would return with good news, and that his prayers to the universe had been answered. "Come with me." She invited him in, returning a few minutes later, and beckoned him with her hand. "Here, Helen, this is the guy I told you about," she said, opening the office door and a pretty woman sitting behind the desk. "What's your name?" asked it to the supervisor, Jack. Jack firmly answered the teenager. "And middle name." The boy thought for a moment. He didn't have a real middle name. Since he had been raised in an orphanage since birth, he had never known his biological parents and didn't want to know. They had abandoned him, which meant they didn't want him to have a child. That's why he didn't want to have parents either. The woman looked at him suspiciously, but continued her questioning. "How old are you?" 16. Where do you go to school? Do you have any work experience? Jack hesitated. The manager obviously didn't need to know that he had escaped from an orphanage, was studying there as well, and the only work experience he had was cleaning an orphanage. Off and on, going to school, and you know it's mine. And work experience. I worked as a janitor and a boxman for my uncle, an auto mechanic. The woman wrote something down with a pen on a document. But I can't officially employ you, but you can work part-time for us unofficially, the manager said after a while. Say thank you, Vasilisa. She's the one who did the training for you. Perfect for me, respectfully replied the boy. Your passport, asked the woman. I hold out my hand. Jack looked at her anxiously and nervously. He didn't have a passport, or rather he had one, but only the principal had access to the records of the orphanage for such children. What Jack was running away deep into the night didn't even cross his mind. It is not there, nonchalantly answered Jack. You mean how? In complete amazement asked the woman. My father. My father doesn't want me to work, so he took away my passport and gives it to me only on special occasions, said the boy. The woman said, puzzled, and shook her head incredulously. Well, you will still work for us unofficially. At the same time, 2 whole weeks on probation. So you will bring as much as you can. I'll take your word for it. You sat down and said you're a good person and you won't let us down. Truly, Jack nodded silently. Come on, I'll show you around welcoming you, Vasilisa told him, waiting for the results of the interview near the office. That's how Jack found himself with both a job and a place to live. In the evening of the same day, one of the waiters offered him an apartment for 2. Fairly reasoned that it would be less burdensome for 2, and Jack settles in with his new companion Vasily. Meanwhile, in the rich house Jack had broken into, a couple days ago, a lot of things were happening. Andrew, I'm home shouting she's a fine woman. Her mink coat was covered with snow. It was snowing heavily, and the cab stopped farther away than it should have. The road had not yet been cleared. A butler came up to the mistress and removed her heavy burden behind Andrew, where he was carrying it. She ordered the servant. I'll call him in a moment. The butler answered courteously and left for the check room. The woman threw her gloves on, carelessly took off her shoes, and walked to the first-floor sitting room. She allowed the maid to pour herself a glass of wine and waited for her guard. He had called at an odd hour yesterday and told a strange story about a vagrant breaking into the house and smashing a vase. He also went through the floors and stole some jewelry from a jewelry box in one of the bedrooms. It's a miserable loss. It didn't upset the landlady much. That jewelry box contained worthless costume jewelry. It had been brought into the guest bedroom once to please the little daughter of one of the hostess's friends. It was left there, but the very fact of the intrusion made Lisa very angry. She was determined to give her guards a tough showdown. Finally, Andrew, the eldest of the 3 security guards in this rich house, appeared, and his inflamed eyes said that he had not slept at all, thinking how to defend himself in this whole story to his mistress. Good evening, Lisa. Cautiously, he said hello. Come here, tell me what happened, Lisa said in a threatening tone. The guard began to tell her the details of the incident. He even mentioned what the boy was wearing, which he didn't say, but surprised the woman. What a memory you have, in a caustic tone, Lisa remarked. Where did you get such details? So embarrassed, Andrew. So I was just looking at the security cameras today. Okay, so they were working. Why the hell didn't you show them to me right away? Well, I thought you wanted to get the details of the story from me. What the hell details? I just want that brazen thief. Find him. We need to punish him so the others don't. And if you don't find him, you'll be saying goodbye to your well-paid security job. He didn't feel like it. In a small room with monitors, the guard pressed some keys and the screen showed an image. At first, nothing happened. The camera just filmed the black exit from the house. But after a minute, the monitor showed movement. The door fell away and a boy entered the house. His face was indistinguishable in the semi-darkness. Andrew switched the image, and now the video surveillance was from the 2nd floor. It was clearly visible as the boy entered the guest bedroom, rummaged through the jewelry box, stuffed his loot into his pocket. Walks out next. On the fast-forwarded view, it showed him walking down the stairs. At some point, the landlady tensed up and ordered him to stop and draw away. The woman took a long look at the footage of the little thief, examining the painting and fidgeting in front of the mirror. Her breathing quickened. Her hands trembled, her face reddened and covered with vapor. "Lisa, you're all right. Careful," Andrew asked. But it was as if the woman didn't hear him. Her eyes went black, she felt dizzy, and she passed out. She probably would have fallen off the chair she was sitting on. But Andrew caught her at the last moment. "Hi, and Uncle David." Maria said hello, peering into the janitor's, "And I really appreciate your concern." David replied sadly, "Have you heard from Jack?" "No," sighed Maria. After Jack left, everything changed. It was as if life was no longer colorful. Every day brought terrible pain. The very next day after the escape, when everyone learned the details of his disappearance, the girls declared a real bullying. In the canteen, they spit in her food, pounced in the shower room, poured cold water on her. Once she was shoved into the boys' room in her underwear. The girl cried for a long time. She told her Uncle David, the only person she could tell everything to. There was no more support from tutors and teachers. Her grades were lowered, and she was held accountable for every little thing. She was humiliated in front of everyone. Maria suffered a lot during that couple weeks. She understood the bullying, the organized viper. She could do nothing about it. And there was no word from Jack. What about him? Where was he? She was so worried. Maria was already beginning to fear the worst, but she still hoped that Jack just hadn't found a way to contact her yet. The police continued their search, but it was pointless. There wasn't a single lead. And Maria, of course, remained silent. She would never break a promise. Several times she was summoned by the principal and threatened in various ways that she would be handed over to a mental institution, sent to a juvenile colony. But the girl was still silent. She believed in friendship and honestly, and in New Year's miracles. After all, somewhere they exist. In the meantime, he worked hard in the cafe, delivering orders, washing dishes. He was not used to scrubbing floors. Therefore, having once replaced the cleaning lady, he took over the job. The salary was paid once a week. The money was enough to eat and pay for the apartment, which they now rented for two. The rest of the money he saved in his spare time and traveled to dog shelters. But the dog was nowhere to be found. Jack did not despair and did not give up and continued to search. "I finally got my mom a new coffee maker," Kevin said to his new friend in passing. He was already 20 years old and had been working at the cafe for almost a year. His mother lived in another neighborhood, but she visited her son often, and Kevin promised to introduce her to Jack someday. But so far Jack has only seen her in pictures. The beautiful woman works in a law firm. At her husband, Jack was very jealous of his friend because he had a full-fledged family. True, the husband of the mother came to Vasily not father, but stepfather. But this is completely unimportant. He was a good uncle, according to Vasily, and treated his stepson as his own son. Vaja's mother had some dark past, and until he was 6 years old, the boy was brought up at his grandmother's house. But then things got better. She took her son in. She married a second time, and they had a normal, happy family. Kevin loved his mother and really wanted to please her at Christmas, so he went to work part-time in a cafe, along with going to law school. He rented an apartment to feel like an adult, independent of his parents. Jack understood that feeling. He'd experienced it himself, just like David the janitor. He was like a father to him. Of course, Jack did not tell Vaja that he lived in an orphanage and told all his new friends that he was saving up for a present for his favorite uncle. "I need a search team here right away and get Kelly," ordered Lisa. As soon as she woke up in bed, the girl immediately ran to fulfill the order. Next to Lisa sat her guard and looked at her pitifully. "Wouldn't it be better to call the police?" Puzzled, asked Andrew. "No," she objected loudly. "I don't want publicity. Otherwise, everyone will think it's easy to get into my house. After all, my guard likes to take naps." Andrew turned away silently. He hated to hear such words from the lady of the manor, but she was right. He had failed in his job and now had no right to decide what to do. He's lost his chance to be a true confidant of the mistress. Tell me, what did you see? Did you get so scared and then you fainted? Careful, he asked Lisa. None of your business. The woman replied blankly, not taking her eyes off the door. She was waiting for Kelly, the estate manager. She was the person who knew why a common thief had caused such a violent reaction. Lisa finally had the door open and Kelly entered the room. Okay, Andrew, everyone, leaving us alone, ordered the landlady sharply. With a sigh, the guard stood up and left the room, but stayed at the door to overhear the two women's entertaining conversation. Oh, this is a terrible situation, said Lisa. That thief is Jack, Jack, marveled the manager of the whore's son. Are you sure? Yes. I've already called all the agents. Lisa continued. He must be tracked down at all costs. He is a threat to my existence. There was silence in the room. And then footsteps were heard. The guard sent the door open and it swung open. Kelly gasped in fright. What are you doing here? She asked suspiciously. Checking the outlets. Andrew got out of it. The woman gave him a scornful look and left with loud clacking of her heels. Andrew went to his room to think about what he had heard. Apparently, this thief was familiar to them. His name was Jack, but this information gave Andrew nothing. So he decided to get to the truth, whatever it took. The first thing he did was to go to Kelly, who was in charge of the household and obviously knew more about the boy than anyone else. Hello, said the guard in a friendly voice as he looked into the housekeeper's room. She was sitting at the desk and frantically writing something down. What do you want? Said the woman, not taking her eyes off the paper. I wanted to ask you something, the man began. So ask, don't drag it out. In general, you know this thief, the guard carefully asked the question, closing the door behind him. The woman immediately pulled away from the documents and looked at him suspiciously. You don't know what you're getting into, Andrew. You better forget about him and you'll be fine. Kelly said sternly. I mean, this boy is unusual. He has some kind of meaning to the mistress. The woman stood up from the table. A mask of anger froze on her face. I warned you, she said threateningly. The guard raised his eyebrows well. But keep in mind, if you don't tell me everything you know, I'll tell your mistress where her diamond bracelet disappeared to. After all, it wasn't the maid who was scandalously fired a couple months ago. The man said with a smirk. You probably don't know this, but I made a copy of the video before you deleted it. Kelly immediately darkened and sat back in her chair. Okay, she muttered grudgingly. I feel like the truth is about to come out. I don't think she'll be able to keep this secret forever. What do you mean by that? Andrew asked with increasing interest. Kelly was silent for a few seconds, gathering her courage, but then she told the old story. A character that seems to be coming together again on the pages of this story. It all started a long time ago. Our Lisa had a sibling named Robert. He was gravely ill in the last months of his life, sitting in a wheelchair. I don't remember what kind of illness he had, but he died very young. He was about 27 years old at the time, I think. And 8 months after he died, Jack was born. It turned out that one of the maids had gotten Robert pregnant. And he died a month later. That's the trouble. Lisa was furious that her late brother had a bastard by the maids. She couldn't have that, so she kicked the girl out. But a few months later, just before Christmas, at this very time, 15 years ago, a basket with a baby in it was dropped at our gate, with a note saying, Here's your nephew, call him Jack, and since I don't have the means to raise him, I'm putting him in your hands. Oh, the mistress is angry again. After all, the wench named her brat Jack, probably to make her even angrier. She and Robert's father's name was Jack. She wouldn't change the baby's name for some reason, but she wouldn't keep it for herself. She gave it to the orphanage, of course. See if they'd adopt him. Looks like the poor kid either went to a bad family or he was never adopted at all. And the point is, Lisa has no right to this house and all this wealth. Her father's will specify exactly that the estate goes to his son Alexei. And according to the rules, if he also had a son, he would subsequently be the heir. That's why Lisa barreled away from Jack's baby. Firstly, to avoid all the fuss, and secondly, to get the inheritance. But you can't just give a baby to an orphanage. They're overcrowded as it is. And you mean to say that a woman with $1 billion fortune came to them just like that? gave the child to them, and the whole case is closed," interrupted the guard. "No, of course our Lisa is not that stupid. Otherwise, how would she have gotten this house? And all that wealth? And she paid the principal at the orphanage to keep their secret forever. So if Jack escaped from the orphanage, she must be terribly nervous. Her career hangs in the balance. I mean, if all this deception gets out, she's gonna get fired for sure. And I think she could even go to jail for grand bribery. How much she paid her, I don't know, but it was a lot. A lot. It took Andrew a long time to get the meaning of the story he just heard. He couldn't believe that the landlady, who seemed to him to be a decent woman, turned out to be a real criminal. Where does his mother Jack live? Suddenly the guard asked. You asked the question, Kelly said indignantly. I haven't heard from her since then. What was your name? I don't remember my first name, just my last name. I think Roberts repeated the man's name and headed for the room. I don't know what you're up to, Andrew. The manageress spoke warningly. But I feel that I can't prevent you from doing anything good. But I won't help you either. Mind you, I'm not burned out enough to lose my place yet. And I also want to warn you that Lisa is a really dangerous person, and so am I. I'm pretty sure her brother didn't die of natural causes. I had to tell someone. Make it you. And Lisa's last agents are already looking for that boy. Do you understand? The guard nodded and left the room. What he had just learned made a huge impression on him. He was determined to find the boy and himself. After all, it was not for nothing that he had served in the Internal Special Forces for so many years. He had some people-finding skills. Andrew went into his den and reviewed the security cameras again. It didn't help him at all. Then he went to a special website that he had access to because of an old friendship. Here it was possible to look up addresses and many other data of people by surname. Let's say there were over 200 Roberts living in their town. The search would have taken a long time if the guard hadn't gotten Kelly's help again. Look, I think the maid's name was Anna Blondie. Unfortunately, I can't find any pictures of her. She might have changed her last name, mumbled the woman, peering into the room. The search was now narrowed down to 30 people. It was necessary to go through everyone and see who could more or less fit. The guard found 2 women who seemed suitable, writing down their addresses. He decided to go to them. The agent who arrived had just left the house, leaving Lisa alone with her problem. She didn't know what she should do now. Poison her brother. Seemed like a great idea at one time, and until that damn baby, now almost a grown-up guy, fell on her head. He ruined all her plans. First of all, it was about to be Christmas, which she had planned to spend in Thailand. But now those plans were gone, and secondly, her position in this house was now very precarious. The sudden arrival of her nephew was a threat to everything she'd spent so long building. It was unbearable. Lisa poured herself some more wine, and then in a fit of sudden rage, Schwartz threw the bottle against the wall. The dark red liquid poured over the Venetian plaster, an ugly stain spreading splatter on the wall. Shards scattered across the floor and the expensive carpet. Hello, are you Anna Roberts? Andrew asked as a woman in her 50s opened the door. She looked at him in amazement. Yes, I'm not sure, the woman replied. Your son, Jack, do you remember if he was started by a man? Of course, it's my son who doesn't know what he wants. The man answered the woman perplexed. He is in big trouble now, and how in trouble, shouted the woman. He had an accident on that motorcycle after all. And I told him I always told him, oh, you'll get into trouble with that damn iron. Oh God, and the woman started to cry. Then Andrew himself did not realize what was happening. Excuse me, what kind of motorcycle your son is only 15 years old? What? The woman was indignant. My son is already 30 years old. How dare you scare me like that? I'm sorry, I think I made a mistake. Yeah, you almost gave me a heart attack. Andrew stepped away as the woman literally pounced on him with fists and then slammed the door in anger. This mistake was very unpleasant. Next time, he promised himself to be more careful with the words he spoke. He'll end up in court. Give all the mothers a heart attack. What good would that do? Good afternoon. You, Anna Roberts? The guard asked tiredly. Now he had to drive across town. "Yes, I am. Who's bothering you?" A young woman answered the door. "Child Services. Here's the story. You used to have a son named Jack." "No," she said, surprised. "But you didn't have a child 15 years ago." The man interrupted her. He already realized that this was not the Anna he was looking for. That woman had to be more than 40 years old, and this woman could be at most 30 years old. No, she wasn't. "Why you?" But she couldn't finish her sentence. "Did you find my Jack?" Suddenly a voice came from behind. Andrew turned around and saw another woman coming up the stairs. She had 2 bags of groceries in her hands. "And who are you?" Andrew wondered. "I'm Anna Roberts," the woman declared. And this she pointed to the girl in the doorway. "This is my friend." The man was invited to enter the house, and he immediately agreed. "Why did you introduce yourself as Anna?" the man asked the girl. "So I was waiting for the master to fix the internet." Anna made a request for herself, went to the store, and then you came in, so I was confused. The man raised his eyebrows and nodded understandingly. "So you, Andrew, are from the guardianship authorities?" The real Anna asked excitedly, looking at the guest. "Not exactly," the guard answered embarrassedly, and told them everything he knew, as well as outlined his further plan of action. "In that case," he finished, "your son is not going to be well, is he? Are you ready to help me?" And you ask. "I've been looking for him for so many years, but I was told that he was given up for adoption long ago. Taken God knows where, what I need to do. I'm ready to go anywhere right now," she screamed in excitement. "We need to find him right away and do it faster than Lisa's people will," the man said firmly. The first place they went was to the orphanage. It was the most logical place for the boy to return to. Kelly had given them the address of the orphanage where Andrew had been taken. Anna and Andrew went there. "Buddy, we're looking for this boy right here. Maybe you know someone like that." Andrew asked the guard, holding out a photo of Jack. It was a screenshot from the surveillance cameras. The guard scrutinized the photo and said, "We have a Jack named Jack. How could you not know? He runs away from here every now and then. Now he's on the run, and they still can't find him. Do you have any information about him? Then you'll have to see the director. A couple looks good." "Maybe," said the woman. "Where's your director?" "I'll call the front desk." "Come in," came a voice from behind the door. Andrew and Anna followed the direction of the well-pitched voice. Kate received them with a completely stony expression, although she had already been told the reason for the visit. "Go ahead." Anna immediately became agitated. "I've come for my son. His name is Jack. That's what they told us here," she exclaimed, although she and Andrew had agreed not to reveal all the details at once. "Why should I upset you?" The Viper replied nonchalantly. "This boy has been missing for weeks. He will probably be declared dead soon." Anna looked at Andrew in despair. Her eyes seemed to be screaming at her that he was telling the truth. "Nothing of the sort," he said confidently, turning to the principal. "He's alive. And recently CCTV cameras caught him at a suburban estate in an estate." Viper interjected with some surprise. "Never mind," muttered Andrew, realizing he'd said too much. "So you don't have any information, is that right?" The woman looked at him suspiciously, and then a faintly evil grin appeared on her face. "No, I don't," Kate replied as convincingly as possible. Then the man silently stood up and walked toward the exit. Anna followed him. The principal did not try to stop them. She did, however, call the right place. Lissa asked Viper into the receiver. There was a sigh, and then a tired voice said, "What do you want?" "Who gave you this number?" "It's Kate." "Kate, the director of the shelter. I'm sure you remember me. I have something I'd like to tell you that's not particularly pleasant. The thing is, Jack is missing." "Really?" Lisa said ironically. "You knew, we've been looking for him for a long time. And with you I will have a separate conversation, if my memory serves me correctly. Many years ago you and I understood each other well. How could you miss him? And why is he still at the orphanage? Should you have gotten rid of him a long time ago? There's a lot of reasons, but that's not why I'm calling you. I wanted to warn you that a couple just came by the shelter looking for him. They're determined. I've pulled in all my services. We're looking for him, and we will find him. Pray no one finds out." Lissa whispered angrily and hung up the phone. Kate listened to the short and annoying beeps and bit her lip nervously. "Where can we find him?" Anna cried. As she and Andrew walked down the stairs, leaving the shelter, "Calm down, we'll find your Jack." Andrew reassured her as he opened the door. Suddenly, some girl called out to them. "Jack," Maria asked loudly, stopping shoveling snow. She just couldn't help herself. Andrew turned to wrinkle his forehead and looked at her questioningly. He and Anna looked at each other and approached the girl. "Hi. Do you know something about Jack?" asked Andrew. "Yeah, he's a friend of mine." "Who are you?" "We're his friends too, believe me." Anna answered her. Maria looked long and distrustful at the woman's face and finally nodded. "I believe you. You are kind. He recently gave me a letter." "What letter? Can you give it to us?" Anna asked quickly and looked at the girl with great hope. There were tears in her eyes. "I had to burn it so Jack wouldn't get caught." Barely audible, Maria spoke. "What was in that letter? Who could hurt him? He's afraid of someone. He's been threatened. Where is he now?" Anna just bombarded Maria with questions, and Maria told them everything that had happened. Why did Jack run away, and where could he be found? She just didn't have the energy to keep quiet and keep it to herself. And these people, they were obviously very interested in him. She believed them. The bastards had a sixth sense that their intentions for Jack were good. "So now he works in this cafe," Andrew clarified. When Maria finished her story, the girl nodded affirmatively. "Thank you, sweetie." Anna stroked her cheek affectionately. "I will never forget what you did for my son, Maria marveled. "You?" "Yes, I am his mother." Anna nodded affirmatively, biting her lip to keep from crying right here, in the courtyard of this terrible place. "Please don't tell anyone as long as you promise." Of course, Maria stared at her mesmerized. "I know you'll find him. You're sure to find him." When the two adults left, Maria stood still for a long time, looking after them in tears. Joyful hopes flowed down her cheeks, heated with excitement. And she didn't even think of freezing. "So at this address, we have a Cafe Caribbean," muttered Andrew, sitting down in the car and looking at the navigator. "From here to the place, 46 minutes Caribbean." Anna marveled. "But that's where my son works." Well, of course, Andrew looked anxiously at the woman. "The girl told us so. You don't understand." Anna shook her head. "Another son. Before Jack was born, I already had a child. I was married and had a boy. He's 20 now. So he works at the same place as Jack now." Oh my God. Andrew rolled his eyes. This story was getting bigger and bigger by the hour. "Hello." The girl behind the bar smiled friendly at the new customers. "Come in, sit down. The waiter will come to you now." "Thank you. But that's not why we're here." No, we don't need coffee." "Thank you. We're looking for Jack, a 15-year-old boy we were told works here." "I'll check it out." The barista smiled radiantly and ducked into Helen's back room. "Jack is being asked by what look like very serious people." "That's the last thing we need," the manager worried. "He's not on our payroll. Maybe it's some kind of inspection. Tell them they've made a mistake. I'll call him now and tell him not to come in today." "Thank you, Kate. Thanks for waiting." Still smiling, Kate reappeared. The strangers waited patiently. "Unfortunately, we don't have any employees with that name." "You must have been misinformed." "I'm sorry." Jack leisurely staggered down the street. Today, he had been given an unexpected day off. Some kind of inspection came to the cafe, and all the freelancers were sent home. Something to do with the IRS. It's a shame to lose his income. But it freed up time to look for Doggy. The boy never gave up hope of finding his terrible friend. But now it was quite late, and the run was fruitless. Half a city disappointed Jack approached his entrance, as suddenly a huge man stood in his way. He looked like a real giant. Didn't it seem to you that he was about 2.5 meters tall? He was wearing a black suit, black shirt, and dark glasses. He looked very imposing with his arms folded across his chest. "Did the man have a bass voice?" asked Jack. The boy was so frightened that he nodded. He sensed the danger in his gut, but the big man caught up with him in 2 jumps, threw him on the ground, and twisted his arms from behind. It down. From there, everything unfolded as if in a dense night gloom. A sharp stabbing pain in his shoulder, and he was being dragged somewhere. A slam, car doors, darkness. The car stopped right in front of the house where Kevin was renting the apartment, and Jack with him. Anna jumped out of the car and ran to the entrance. Andrew followed her. Kevin had spotted them from inside, glancing outside the first-floor window. "Mom," he looked at her questioningly as he opened the door. "What are you doing here? Did something happen?" The look on his mother's face startled him. "Jack's son, answer me, please. There's a boy named Jack who works with you. I think he just got a job at your cafe." "How do you know Jack?" The son was becoming more and more surprised at what was happening. "Just answer me, please." Andrew said, "There's no time to explain who I am. And what this has to do with your mother." The boy stared at this man he didn't know with bewilderment, but still said, "Yes, of course I know Jack. He lives with me. I told you last week, Mom, I found a roommate." "Oh my God," Anna cried out and slapped herself on the forehead with all her might. "Mom," Kevin marveled. "What's the matter with you, son?" "Son, I'll explain everything to you later. Take care of yourself." She spoke quickly. She smacked, kicked him in the cheek, and literally ran out of the entrance. Behind her came out a stranger man, tentatively patted him on the shoulder in a friendly manner. Not understanding anything, the guy shrugged, closed the door, and returned to his computer. "Here are my guests," Lisa said with a wicked irony. "When Anna and Andrew came inside, and I was so looking forward to seeing you. Did you really hope to find the boy faster than me? Why don't you say something? My loyal guard. There's nothing you want to tell me." Andrew realized she already knew everything. I guess Kelly didn't hide it after all and shot the story down. Or was she forced to tell it? More likely the second, where the boy sternly asked Andrew, "If I were you, I wouldn't expect to get away with something like that." "Well, you're not in my shoes yet," Lisa laughed and threw it. It looked like she was very drunk. "And the boy is gone," in a mocking tone, Lisa added. "And vaporized. And was there a boy? And where did you put my son, the bastard?" Anna exclaimed. There was no limit to her anger. This woman had ruined her whole life, thrown her out on the street when she most needed shelter and work. Then she took away my son. She trampled all over everything. Lisa's face had changed. Now she was not smiling, but only looking at Anna contemptuously and angrily. "How dare you call me that in my house?" The owner of the mansion was indignant. And then something happened that no one expected. Anna lashed out at Lisa. Both women clashed and fell to the floor. Anna clawed at her dungeon like a cat and began to tear the hair from her head. Lisa fought back and yelled and screamed with her free legs. Andrew rushed to break them up. He got caught up in the heat of the battle, where my son was hysterically screaming at Anna. Finally, running away at the commotion, the stewards helped Andrew melt down, grabbing all the women. Anna collapsed into a chair, clasping her hand and drumming her cheek. Lisa, breathing heavily, sat on the floor near the fireplace. "You're not going to get away with this." Anna finally broke the tense silence. "Do you really think you can stand up to me?" Lisa smirked. "I'm not going to let you ruin my life. Everything was fine until you sluts showed up here. How dare you seduce my brother?" "We loved each other," cried Anna. Of course, she realized that it was better not to show weakness in front of this terrible woman. But her emotions were running high. "He was your own brother. How could you? It's not my fault I was born a woman. My daddy bequeathed everything to him, not me. He'd take the whole inheritance and I'd get a pittance. I had to secure my future. I loved him too. I had a hard time making that choice once too. I'm not a killer, but I had to kill him. I had to, you know? It was his own fault. He got together with the servants, had a baby from some crush. So you killed him." Andrew came forward. "How did you do it?" "It was easy." Lisa laughed. The liquor had loosened her tongue. "I put rat poison in his food for a long time and very carefully, just a little bit at a time," she declared triumphantly, as if she were telling me about her merits. "He's always had poor health. No one noticed anything. Even the doctor who wrote out the death certificate for this baby, she wrinkled her nose like a toothache. Did you win him from me? Anna jumped up from her chair again. Her eyes glittered furiously. How dare you take my baby away from me? I didn't put anyone out, Lisa resented. You dropped him off right on my porch yourself. That she opened her mouth in indignation, but could say nothing. And only silently, like a fish thrown on land with a noise, sucked in air in an empty attempt to breathe. Okay, I think that's enough for today. Suddenly, there was a strange, commanding male voice. It sounded so out of place in this house that everyone in the room flinched in surprise. Everyone except Andrew remained in their seats. The new phrase added to the sound, and the owner himself lord of other phrases. A man in a police uniform entered the room, stomping the boots of the clean carpets, followed by two others. This is a detention. The man entered in a casual tone and announced that Lisa Lisovskaya was a citizen. You are detained on suspicion of premeditated murder. The silent scene, which lasted after these words for 2 or 3 minutes, ended this eventful evening. Then everyone started to talk animatedly, and some of them shouted and threatened. But this does not concern the point of our narrative at all. Jack was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a straitjacket. He wanted to cry more than anything else in the world. He had already tried everything: bursting out, fighting, running, and openly breaking a window or secretly finding some loophole. But alas, there was no escape. New Year's Eve was only 2 days away, and it looked like he was going to spend the holiday in a real asylum. When he was brought back to the orphanage, they wouldn't even let him talk to any of his friends. They put him in the basement like they always do. They took him out after a few hours and brought him here. This is where they sedated him. They tied him to the bed for any untimely word, tied him to the bed for trying to escape, gave him some shots that gave him a terrible headache, and he didn't care about anything at all. Sometimes it seemed to Jack that he had already died and gone straight to hell. But for what? When Lisa was taken away, Andrew again used his longtime connections, which they used to find her very quickly. Where was Jack taken? In the emergency room of the asylum where he had left Anna, who had absolutely nothing to do, and the wards stank horribly of the box. Turning around, he saw her face. It was completely white and seemed to blend in with the walls. No, the walls were dirty, but there was no blood on Anna's face. "Excuse me, who are you?" Jack asked when he opened his eyes and saw a strange woman sitting on a chair in the headboard next to his bed. I guess he said it too quietly. She hadn't heard him. Looking closer, Jack realized she was asleep, sitting in an uncomfortable, awkward position. Either those pills they'd given him had taken a toll on his physical and mental state, or he was asleep too. But he felt as if he'd seen her somewhere before in some distant, beautiful dream. Jack smiled at his dreamy memory and closed his eyes again. When he woke up the next time, she was there too, and again, and again. Well, the stern doctor once again scrutinized Jack carefully. "I think the patient can be discharged, but only under your responsibility," he said to Anna. "After the holidays, you will definitely come back. We will need to do the examination again to take blood, and we will definitely come." The doctor interrupted him by a man of sturdy build standing next to him. "What questions?" But suddenly said Jack. "But I don't know you at all, where you are going to take me." "Nowhere without your wish." The man smiled at him. "But I think someone will be able to help us." Jack tensed up, waiting for more blows of fate. These people were quite nice. They didn't yell, didn't drug him, and generally treated him well. Who knows? And he had gotten used to the fact that he couldn't trust anyone. In addition, he was told some fairy tale about how he would have a real family and a house of his own, or something like that. He couldn't remember things very well now. Everything was a blur. Jack, a girl of about 14 years old, came into the room and approached his bed. "Jack, do you remember me?" She asked him hopefully. "Do you really remember me, Maria?" The boy smiled. "You, Maria? That's right." She laughed and cried at the same time. "You recognized me. You recognized me. Jack, will you please listen to me? Nothing bad will ever happen to you again. You hear me? It's over. Our Viper's in jail. Can you believe it? We have a new principal now, such a nice woman. She put up a Christmas tree in the lobby. Can you imagine a real Christmas tree? That's great. Jack marveled, smiling weakly. I must be dreaming, decided the boy, and I'm dreaming. I don't want to wake up. I don't want to wake up. Maria kept talking and counting, like a happy little bird. I think she said he should go away with these nice people. Well, since Maria said so. He woke up again, this time a different bed. Not a hospital bed this time. It was so strange around, cozy or something. Where was he? Not in an orphanage, and certainly not in a mental institution. Jack lay there for a while with his eyes open. Looked around. The room was furnished like people who live in their own homes. Curtains on the windows, flowers, soft carpet, a rack of books, a desk, a computer. Stop. What's that sound? He carefully lowered his legs out of bed. His head didn't seem to be dizzy anymore. Tried to stand up, leaning against the walls. Waddled to the door. Strange. It's not even locked, Maximov. It sounded again, even closer. And a small brown dog with big funny ears rushed into the room, wagging his whole body. We were thrilled. He rushed to Jack, started petting, hopping on his hind legs, trying to jump up to his friend's face. Donut trembling voice said, Jack Donut, is it really you? The dog confirmed and hastily sat down on his hind legs. And the front ones made a bunny. My little one. Jack shouted out of joy and picked up the little dog in his arms and held him tightly to himself. And he finally licked the salt water of the sacred cheeks with his soft pink tongue. Jack, are you awake? A smiling woman came into the room, the same woman who had been with him in the hospital. How are you feeling? Sort of okay, the boy answered, confused, and tried to remember who she was. Why is she here? Why is he here? When you get dressed, let's go downstairs. Everyone is already gathered and waiting for you to wake up. This new cryptic phrase confused Jack again. He still didn't understand anything. Don't worry, everything will be all right, the woman told him and looked so affectionate that he immediately believed her. Besides, now he had his donut again. She walked out, and Jack even forgot to ask her where his dog had come from. Maybe he did die, and now he's finally going to heaven. Is this woman a real angel? That would be nice. Downstairs, where he went down the stairs with her help, there were so many people. It made his eyes water. He saw Uncle David and smiled happily at him. Maria was sitting next to him. She immediately ran up and hugged him tightly and even cried a little. Then there was this tall jock who also came to the hospital, and Kevin. Where did you come from here? Jack asked him in surprise. And I wanted to add, did you die too? But that would have been a bit off, so he kept silent. Kevin laughed and said that he would find out soon. Then everyone started talking. The tall jock first. He told how he had overheard his landlady talking to her manager and realized that the selection had infiltrated the house. Not just a street vagrant, realized, and he was horrified. How cruel could people be? Something turned over in his soul, and he decided to help this boy and his mother. Jack listened attentively, but he didn't understand everything. However, he remembered that he had really been in some rich house, and a mirror and a broken vase. There was a portrait. Suddenly he said aloud and became embarrassed. Everyone looked at him. Right? The tall man said carefully. You remembered it well. You looked a lot like me, Jack said and smiled embarrassedly. This portrait was of your father. The pretty woman came closer and inquisitive. Looked into his eyes. Do you understand? Yes, nodded Jack. He didn't really believe this information, but he had to be polite. They're all so worried. And me. I'm your mom, the woman said even more quietly and wept. Jack's son. Mama, he looked at her, even startled. Mama. Yeah. She put her arms around him and pressed her cheek firmly against his cheek. My son. We were separated a long time ago when you were born. By bad and very bad people. But it's all right now. You hear me? Everything's gonna be all right. I found you, Jack. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. Kevin came over and patted Jack on the shoulder. Hey, stop hugging. Kevin reproachfully said Anna and released Jack from her embrace. It turns out that we are brothers. reported Kevin, dumbfounded young Jack. That's it. Jack could not answer anything and only shook his head. You'll get used to it. Kevin laughed and clapped him on the shoulder again. Jack was approached by Maria again. Congratulations. Now you have a real family. Mash in the received lump in the throat carefully said Jack. And who are you? Probably my sister. No, laughed the girl. But in her laughter clearly heard shades of bitterness. I'm just your friend, just like before. Only you won't be living in an orphanage now. You got a mom, can you believe it? And it's Christmas. And everything is so wonderful. Oh, Jack, you're so lucky. I'm so happy for you. You are, aren't you? The faithful donut came running up and tailed me. He barked happily and sat down next to Jack, expressing complete doggy happiness. I finally have an owner, Uncle David. Jack looked for his older friend. And you? I haven't changed a bit either, the janitor smiled. I hope you haven't changed either. Now that I've become such a happy and rich young man. I'm rich, Jack marveled, and suddenly he laughed at the top of his voice. I understood through the laughter, he said. You're just kidding me. Nobody's kidding you. Andrew came over and put a heavy hand on his shoulder. You're having a hard time because you've been drugged up to your eyeballs with all that crap in the asylum. That's why your head's doing all those crazy things. But you're almost well enough to get over it. The rest will be your mother, your family, and your new home. And yes, you're a pretty wealthy young man now. Your friend is right. In fact, you'll be rich soon. I just have to get the proper paperwork. Don't worry. Vanya, Kevin is back in the conversation. Later you go, and today we'll celebrate Christmas and have fun. Okay, Jack nodded. Really, he wouldn't think about the whole story now. He wouldn't. He'd think about it some other time. But tell me, he turned to Uncle David again. How the donut turned up. Maria and I were looking for it while you were in the hospital. David. While you were lying in hospitals, we couldn't find it. You know where? At the circus. Completely by accident. We went to every shelter in town. When they fired our Viper, they assigned another director to us. You can live under her, you know? Maria even lets me go into town with her on my own responsibility. You write an application and go ahead. The main thing is that one of the adults must vouch for you, but you don't have to avoid it. David squinted slyly, although some people have benefited from it. This Christmas, Jack went to bed very early, uncharacteristically early. But then he didn't regret it, because when he woke up the next morning, he finally realized that he wasn't dreaming. He actually now had a home, a family, and a mom. He spent the next few days getting to know his new relatives, and they explained and told him over and over again this amazing, almost miraculous story. Finally, he began to understand something. So Kevin, too, had been born Adam before me. He asked Anna over afternoon tea. Of course, you were born before you, brother. His older brother laughed, shoving him in the side, and quite sensitively smiling in the whole-mouth donut. Sat under the table and sometimes touched his cold, wet nose in the bathroom foot. Yes, dear, answered the patient mother for the umpteenth time, ignoring her eldest son's grimaces. I was married to Jack's father at the time, but then we divorced. He turned out to be a very bad man, and I was left destitute with a small child in my arms. I had to take a job as a maid in a rich house. I'll leave Jack with Grandma for now. By the way, she's coming tomorrow, so you can finally meet her. So in that house you were so lucky to get into recently, I met your father. We fell in love, but he had been in very poor health since childhood. And his sister Lisa took advantage of that. She poisoned him, putting poison in his food month after month. He got weaker and weaker. Soon he couldn't move on his own. I urged him to see a doctor, but he wouldn't. But he only smiled sadly and said that he was ready for everything long ago. I was desperate. When he died, I thought I was going to die too. But then I realized I was pregnant. When Lisa found out, she threw me out of the house without regret and didn't even pay me for the last months of work. And when you were born, I was so weak. The labor was very hard. Then the doctors came and the investigator with them. And they told me that my baby was missing. I almost died of horror again and immediately guessed who could have done such a thing. but it was impossible to prove anything. Lissa was to me a simple woman with no money and no connections, completely unattainable. But she wasn't the one who stole you," said Andrew, sitting at the table with the happy family, but her manager Kelly. The thing is, Kelly was once a close friend of Lisa's. She knew that she had a tendency to alcoholism and knew something else, namely that her friend and part-time hostess would never have children of her own. She hoped to induce her to write a will in her favor, and it must be said, she succeeded in doing so. But that was when you, the newborn son of the rightful heir, stood in her way. She couldn't let your fate remain unknown. She didn't dare to kill the child, but she paid someone to steal you from the maternity hospital and drop you off at Lisa's house, hoping that she would not be afraid of such an abomination. But Lissa didn't want to take any unnecessary heat either. To Kelly's disappointment, she sent you straight to the orphanage, arranged with the principal to get you adopted and out of town. But why didn't anyone ever adopt me? Jack wondered. Didn't anyone want me with my different eyes? They say it's a genetic disorder. Who told you such nonsense? Anna clutched her head. You weren't adopted because your viper wanted to have you close to her, so she could blackmail Lisa on occasion. And if she died, to mess with your head with all sorts of tales and get her inheritance. She'd find a way to take it away from you afterward. And that's for sure. Jack's face darkened and at the memory of his former principal. Let's not talk about sad things. Maria, sitting immediately, put her arm around the boy's shoulders. Everything has long been behind us. What kind of a fool am I? Suddenly slapped himself on the forehead. Jack, I'd forgotten. Oh, Kevin, you saved my money. I'm still asking. Ironic indignation from his brother. Here they are. He went out into the hallway, took out his wallet from his jacket pocket, and handed Jack some bills. I really wanted to buy David a coat as a Christmas present, Jack explained embarrassedly, but I was too late. Christmas had already passed. It's okay, Andrew reassured him. There's still Christmas to come. What's not to celebrate? And indeed, on 25th December, the big happy family welcomed guests again. This time at the head of the table sat the owner of the house, Anna's husband, a well-known lawyer in the city. In the midst of the events described above, he was away, but then actively involved in the story with his wife's youngest son. It was his professional assistance plus Andrew's invaluable connections that decided the outcome of this complicated case. Uncle David, embarrassed, began Jack when all his friends and family were once again seated at one large table. You've been like a father to me all these years. Without you, I wouldn't have survived in that orphanage. I'm very grateful to you. Really, because I ran away that last time to earn money to buy myself a coat for Christmas. And I did. Here, take it, please, without refusing, and please. The guy handed his friend a weighty and gift box. This is very important to me. Thanks, buddy. Thrilled, David said. And I wouldn't have survived without you either. Now let's have a toast, with shining eyes, and said Anna. To friendship. After all, it was the friendship of good, real people that helped you and me to find each other again. And another one, I also know what gift I want for this Christmas. At these words of his mother, Jack, all tensed up, squeezed his head into his shoulders. He suddenly realized that he had no gift for her, and he had just given David expensive coats. That's what you call a son. But Anna did not even look at him at that moment. She looked at Maria. I think you can help me with that too, Maria. I'm a confused girl, as you can see recently. Looking at you, Jack, I realized what I'm missing for complete happiness. And what's interested? Asked Maria. Daughter say, dear, do you want to be my daughter? From excitement, the girl could not utter another word. Tears of delight came to her eyes. Jack said it all for her, Mom. He threw himself on his mother's neck and hugged her tightly. Thank you, Mom. This is the best Christmas present for me, too. That's how the Christmas story came out in one of the most ordinary towns with the most ordinary people who know how to value friendship, their family, and always try to do the right thing.